The wind howled through the peaks of a timeless mountain, carrying whispers of an ancient prophecy that the heavens themselves seemed to tremble in keeping. The clouds hung heavy and low, thick with an untold energy, as if waiting for something extraordinary to pierce through the shroud of their mystery. Amid this eerie stillness, the mountain of flowers and fruit stood tall, a place brimming with life yet touched by something otherworldly. Trees bore fruits of unimaginable sweetness, rivers sparkled as though lined with silver, and the air felt alive, as if nature itself anticipated the miraculous. In the heart of this enchanted land lay an unusual boulder, resting under the gaze of the heavens. No one knew how long it had been there, only that it was unlike any other. Smooth as polished jade and shimmering faintly under the sun, this stone held secrets it hadn't yet shared with the world. Its surface pulsed faintly under the moonlight, almost as if it had a heartbeat of its own. One night, under a sky ablaze with stars, a sudden crack split the silence. The earth shuddered beneath the stone, which now glowed with a fiery intensity. A surge of golden light shot forth, illuminating the mountain in a celestial blaze. From this radiant energy emerged a figure, small, curious, and unafraid. It was a monkey. But not just any monkey. His fur shimmered like spun gold, and his eyes burned with a fiery intelligence that seemed far too ancient for such a young creature. He blinked, taking in the vibrant world that now surrounded him, his every movement filled with purpose, as if he were born knowing he was destined for greatness. The animals of the forest paused in their routines, sensing the arrival of something extraordinary. The winds quieted, the streams stilled, and even the leaves on the trees seemed to hold their breath. The newborn monkey stretched his arms wide, letting out a cry that echoed through the mountains, a sound filled with defiance, curiosity, and boundless energy. This was Sun Wukong. His first steps were tentative, but within moments, he leaped forward with a confidence that startled even himself. He climbed the tallest trees, swung from the strongest vines, and marveled at the world around him. The mountain of flowers and fruit became his playground, every corner an invitation for mischief and wonder. He raced along the riverbanks, splashing water as he chased fish that darted like streaks of light. He tasted fruits of every kind, their flavors bursting like small miracles on his tongue. Though he was young and wild, there was something in his gaze, something restless, something searching. He would often sit atop a high rock, staring into the distance where the clouds touched the horizon. It was as if he could sense that his place in the world was far greater than what lay before him. The other monkeys noticed his strength and boldness. He was faster, braver, and sharper than any of them. They followed him as he led them to hidden groves brimming with fruit and to streams so fresh they sparkled like liquid diamonds. One day, he led them to the water curtain cave, a place hidden behind a cascading waterfall. It was a marvel, a sanctuary of unparalleled beauty, untouched and unclaimed. The monkeys cheered, declaring Sun Wukong their king, their leader, their protector. He stood before them, golden fur glistening in the sunlight that poured through the waterfall, and accepted their adoration with a grin. Yet, in the quiet moments, when the moon cast its silvery light on the world, Sun Wukong felt a pull in his heart, a whisper, a calling. It was not enough to rule a kingdom of monkeys. Somewhere beyond the horizon, beyond the mountains and the rivers, something was waiting for him. He didn't know what it was yet, but he would find it. His story was just beginning, and the skies above seemed to stir, as if even the heavens understood that the world would never be the same. The roar of the waterfall was deafening, a thundering force that seemed to guard something far greater than mere water. The other monkeys huddled at a distance, their eyes wide with wonder and fear. The cascade looked impenetrable, its endless sheets of white froth crashing onto jagged rocks below. But Sun Wukong stood at the edge, his golden fur catching the sunlight like flames. His gaze didn't waver. There was no fear in his eyes, only excitement and a burning determination. He had spent the day leading his tribe across the mountain of flowers and fruit, bounding over rivers and swinging from vines in search of the perfect refuge. The mountain was rich and beautiful, but it wasn't safe. Predators lurked in the shadows, storms could strike without warning, and food, abundant as it seemed, could run out. They needed a sanctuary, a home that no force could take from them. When they stumbled upon the towering waterfall, cascading from a height that seemed to kiss the clouds, Wukong felt an unexplainable pull. This wasn't just another part of the mountain. Something waited beyond that curtain of water. The tribe chattered nervously behind him, their voices uncertain. "It's too dangerous," some murmured. "There's nothing there," others said. But Wukong turned to face them, his voice carrying above the crashing water. "Do you trust me?" His question hung in the air. Slowly, one by one, the monkeys nodded. Though they feared the unknown, they trusted their leader. Wukong had already proved himself to be unlike anyone they had ever known, bold, fearless, and unyielding. Without waiting for more hesitation, he turned back to the waterfall and crouched, his muscles coiling like springs. With a leap, he soared toward the roaring cascade. The water struck him like a wall of iron, its icy force stealing his breath. For a moment, it was chaos, light, noise, and cold all pressing in on him. But he pushed forward, clawing through the torrent with every ounce of strength he had. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the chaos ceased. He emerged on the other side, gasping for air and blinking against the dim light. His heart thundered in his chest as his eyes adjusted. What he saw next made him freeze, his breath catching in his throat. It was a cave, but not like any cave he had ever seen. The walls shimmered faintly, as though embedded with precious stones, and the floor was smooth, worn by centuries of water. Pools of crystal-clear liquid reflected the faint glow, casting dancing patterns on the ceiling. The air was cool but not cold, and there was a stillness that felt sacred, almost holy. This was it. This was their home. Wukong couldn't help but grin, a wild, triumphant smile that lit up his entire face. He raced back through the waterfall, bursting out into the sunlight where the tribe still waited, their faces anxious. "It's incredible," he shouted, his voice ringing with exhilaration. "Come see for yourselves." The monkeys exchanged uncertain glances but began to follow him, one by one. They braved the icy torrent, emerging on the other side to find Wukong standing in the center of the cavern, his arms outstretched as if presenting a treasure. Gasps of awe echoed through the space as the monkeys took in the sight. They explored the pools, the shimmering walls, the high ceiling that seemed to stretch endlessly upward. Laughter and chatter filled the air as their fears melted away. "This will be our home," Wukong declared, his voice firm. "No one can harm us here. No storm can reach us, no predator can cross the water. We will be safe." The monkeys cheered, their voices rising in a chorus of joy and relief. For the first time, they felt truly secure, and it was all because of Wukong. From that day on, they called him their king. The title didn't feel like a burden to Wukong. It felt right. Leading the tribe, protecting them, and giving them a place to call home, it was as if he had been born for this. He wore his crown not as a symbol of power, but as a reminder of his responsibility. Yet even as the tribe settled into their new life, building nests and exploring every hidden corner of the cave, Wukong's restlessness grew. He often stood at the entrance of the cave, staring out at the waterfall and beyond. The laughter and chatter of his tribe would fade into the background as his thoughts drifted. There was a fire inside him, one that couldn't be extinguished by comfort or safety. The cave was magnificent, and his tribe was thriving, but Wukong knew this was only the beginning. The pull he had felt since his birth was stronger now, urging him to look beyond the mountain, beyond the horizon. The skies above seemed to swirl with unseen forces, as if the universe itself awaited his next move. The stars above the mountain of flowers and fruit shimmered like scattered diamonds, cold and eternal against the velvet black of the sky. Sun Wukong sat alone on a jagged cliff, the sounds of his tribe's laughter fading behind him. Their new home in the water-curtain cave was secure, their lives peaceful and content. But his heart was not. He gazed at the endless heavens, his mind heavy with a question that had begun to haunt him. Why should he, the great sage equal to heaven, the one who could leap across mountains and tame rivers, be bound by something as frail as mortality? He had heard the whispers in the wind and the stories carried on the tongues of elders. All beings, no matter how powerful, were destined to fade. He clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. The thought of withering away, of his body succumbing to time, felt like a cruel joke. The mountain, the cave, even the love of his tribe, none of it would matter if he ceased to exist. The fire inside him flared hotter. He would not accept this fate. One day, without warning, Wukong stood at the entrance of the water curtain cave, his staff planted firmly in the ground beside him. The tribe gathered, puzzled by the solemn expression on his face. "I must leave," he announced, his voice steady but filled with an undercurrent of something raw, something restless. A murmur spread through the crowd. "Leave? But why? You are our king, our protector." Wukong's eyes burned as he looked at them. "I cannot lead you if I am bound by the chains of mortality. I will find a way to break them. I will seek immortality, so I can protect you forever." The monkeys watched him, torn between fear and admiration. They knew they could not stop him, and in their hearts, they understood. Wukong was not like them. He never had been. He set off at dawn, the sky painted in shades of gold and crimson. His feet carried him across forests and rivers, through valleys and mountains. The world stretched endlessly before him, a vast and uncharted land filled with secrets he was determined to uncover. The first steps of his quest were not glorious. Days turned into weeks, and Wukong encountered more disappointment than triumph. He approached sages and hermits, their faces withered by time, only to be turned away. "Immortality is not meant for us," they said. But Wukong refused to believe them. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, he found himself at the edge of a dense bamboo forest. The air was heavy with the scent of earth and leaves, and a strange silence hung over the place. Something about it called to him. He stepped inside, the towering bamboo swaying gently above him. For hours, he wandered deeper, the world outside fading with each step. Just as doubt began to creep in, he saw a faint light ahead. His pace quickened, his heart pounding in his chest. The light led him to a small, humble hut nestled among the trees. Smoke curled from its chimney, and the soft sound of chanting drifted through the air. Wukong approached cautiously, his instincts sharp. An old man emerged from the hut, his robes simple but his presence commanding. His eyes, deep and knowing, seemed to pierce through Wukong's very soul. "You have come far," the man said, his voice calm but powerful. Wukong bowed low, the fire in his heart tempered by a newfound respect. "I seek the Tao. I seek immortality." The old man studied him for a long moment before nodding. "The path you seek is not easy. It will demand everything you have and more. Are you prepared?" Wukong's answer came without hesitation. "I am." And so, the old man became his master. The days that followed were unlike anything Wukong had ever known. His master's teachings were cryptic, delivered in riddles and parables that forced him to think, to question, to grow. He was tasked with impossible challenges, his limits tested again and again. There were moments of despair when he wanted to abandon it all, to return to his tribe and the safety of the water curtain cave. But each time, the thought of mortality crept back into his mind, spurring him on. The bamboo forest became his world, its rustling leaves his constant companion. Time lost meaning as he honed his mind and body, pushing himself beyond what he thought possible. One day, after what felt like an eternity, his master approached him. The old man's eyes gleamed with a rare intensity. "You are ready," he said. Wukong followed his master to a secluded grove where the air felt charged, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. His master began to chant, his voice resonating with an ancient power. As the chant grew louder, Wukong felt something shift inside him. It was as if a door had opened, revealing a vast and boundless energy. His body trembled, his mind flooded with visions of eternity. When the chant ended, the grove fell silent. Wukong opened his eyes, and for the first time, he felt truly alive. The fire inside him burned brighter than ever, no longer fueled by fear, but by the knowledge that he had transcended the chains of mortality. His master smiled, a hint of pride in his eyes. "You have achieved what few ever will. Use it wisely. Wukong bowed deeply, gratitude swelling in his chest. But even as he thanked his master, a flicker of something else stirred within him. The quest had not satisfied him, it had only awakened a hunger for more. The wind rustled through the bamboo, carrying with it the promise of challenges yet to come. The wind carried a strange stillness as Sun Wukong climbed the narrow, winding path up the mountain. His heart beat steadily, but his mind buzzed with anticipation. He had heard of the immortal patriarch Subodhi, a master said to hold the key to powers beyond comprehension. It was whispered that those fortunate enough to learn from him could reshape the fabric of existence itself. Wukong was determined to find him, no matter the cost. The air grew colder as he approached a secluded monastery nestled among jagged peaks. The building seemed timeless, its weathered stones whispering stories of countless seekers who had passed through its gates. Wukong pushed them open with a resolute force, stepping inside to face his fate. The courtyard was eerily silent, save for the soft rustle of robes as a figure emerged. Subodhi appeared, his presence commanding without effort. His gaze landed on Wukong, piercing yet calm, as though he could see through every layer of bravado, stripping Wukong down to the essence of his being. "What do you seek?" Subodhi asked, his voice neither warm nor cold, but steady as the mountain itself. Wukong knelt, his head bowed low. "I seek to transcend limits. Teach me." Subodhi studied him, his expression unreadable. Finally, he nodded. "You have the heart of a seeker. But know this, my teachings are not for the faint-hearted. They will demand more from you than you have ever given." The days under Subodhi's tutelage began like the steady drip of water carving stone. Wukong was tasked with menial chores, each seemingly pointless. He swept leaves, carried water, and mended robes. Frustration bubbled within him, this was not what he had come for. But he bit his tongue, knowing that questioning the master would lead to nothing. Then, one day, Subodhi stood before him with a glint in his eye. "You've proven your patience. Now, we begin." From that moment, the world shifted. Subodhi's teachings were unlike anything Wukong had imagined. Each lesson began with riddles that twisted his mind, forcing him to think beyond logic. The physical training was grueling, his body pushed to its limits and then further still. One evening, as the sun bled red into the horizon, Subodhi sat Wukong before a flickering flame. "The first lesson is transformation," he said. "Everything in existence is change. To master yourself, you must master this truth." Wukong stared into the fire, its shape shifting and morphing before his eyes. Subodhi's voice guided him, weaving spells into the air. Slowly, Wukong felt his own form begin to ripple, like water disturbed by a stone. He gasped as he looked down to see his fingers elongating, his body stretching until he no longer recognized himself. The exhilaration of his first transformation was intoxicating. Subodhi's teachings became more intricate, each new lesson building upon the last. Wukong learned to shrink his body until he was no larger than a speck of dust, and to grow until he towered over mountains. He mastered the 72 earthly transformations, each one unlocking a new way to reshape himself and the world around him. But the most profound lesson came not in physical transformation, but in control. Subodhi often said, "Power without discipline is chaos. A true master knows when to act and when to wait." These words struck Wukong like a thunderclap. For all his strength, he had always been driven by impulse, by the raw fire in his soul. Now, he realized that to reach his full potential, he would have to temper that fire. The magic Subodhi taught him was unlike anything Wukong had imagined. He learned to summon clouds and ride them, to call forth winds and command storms. His favorite, however, was a trick Subodhi called cloud somersaulting, a technique that allowed him to leap incredible distances with a single bound. Yet, beneath the exhilaration of power, Wukong began to sense an unspoken tension between them. Subodhi's gaze often lingered on Wukong during their lessons, as though weighing something invisible. One night, as the moon bathed the mountain in silver light, Wukong approached Subodhi. "Master," he said, his voice quieter than usual, "why do you sometimes look at me as though you are unsure?" Subodhi turned to him, the lines on his face deeper in the moonlight. Because you are unlike any student I have taught. Your thirst for power is insatiable. That thirst can be your greatest strength or your greatest weakness. Which it becomes is up to you. The words settled over Wukong like a heavy cloak. He didn't know how to respond, but they stayed with him, gnawing at the edges of his thoughts. Despite his internal struggles, his progress was undeniable. Subodhi began to smile during their sessions, a rare and fleeting thing, but a sign that Wukong was exceeding even his master's expectations. One day, as they stood on the edge of a cliff overlooking the endless expanse of the world below, Subodhi spoke again. You have learned much, but the true test lies ahead. Do not let pride blind you to wisdom. Remember this always. Wukong bowed, the words sinking into his heart even as his mind raced with thoughts of what lay beyond the mountain. For all he had achieved, he felt as though his true journey was only beginning. The wind picked up, carrying with it the faint scent of adventure, of trials yet to come. Wukong stood tall, his eyes blazing with a mix of gratitude and restless ambition. The teachings of Subodhi had transformed him, but he knew they were only the foundation of something far greater. The quiet tension in the air crackled like an unseen storm. Sun Wukong stood at the edge of the courtyard, his breath shallow, his fists clenched. The taste of rebellion was bitter on his tongue, but the fire in his chest roared louder than the warnings that whispered in his mind. Subodhi's words echoed faintly, a haunting reminder. Power without discipline is chaos. But Wukong, drunk on his newfound abilities, thought himself beyond such lessons. Rules felt like chains, holding him back from his rightful place among the greats. He had transformed, he had mastered, and now he wanted the world to kneel before him. One fateful day, a gathering of disciples filled the sacred hall, their chants harmonizing with the rustle of mountain winds. Wukong sat among them, but his gaze was distant, his thoughts fixed not on devotion but on himself. When Subodhi entered, his presence brought the room to silence. He began teaching with his usual calm, but today, Wukong's restlessness bubbled over. The master spoke of restraint, of humility, of wielding power not for personal gain but for the greater good. Wukong's lip curled, his patience stretched thin. The room grew heavy with an unspoken challenge as Wukong stood abruptly. All eyes turned to him, wide with disbelief. Why must we bow to these rules? Wukong's voice cut through the hall like a blade. What use is power if it cannot be used freely? I am no ordinary student, and I will not be caged like one. Subodhi's gaze hardened, his usual calm replaced by something colder, sharper. You speak of freedom, but what you truly seek is chaos. Sit down, Wukong. But Wukong did not sit. Instead, he smirked, a glint of arrogance in his eyes. You fear my strength. Admit it. The hall erupted in murmurs, disciples exchanging nervous glances. Subodhi raised his hand, and silence returned. He stepped closer to Wukong, his voice low but unyielding. You misunderstand, child. I do not fear you. I pity you. The word struck harder than any blow. Wukong's pride flared, and with a wave of his hand, he demonstrated one of his prized transformations, morphing into a towering figure of myth and power. Gasps filled the room, but Subodhi remained unmoved. If this is the path you choose, Subodhi said, his tone like ice, then you are no longer welcome here. Wukong froze, his heart hammering in his chest. For a fleeting moment, doubt clouded his mind. Had he gone too far? But the fire of his ego quickly extinguished the spark of regret. He laughed, a sound that echoed with defiance. Fine, Wukong spat, his voice dripping with venom. I don't need your teachings anymore. I've outgrown them. Subodhi turned away, his expression unreadable. Then go, Wukong. But know this, the world is less forgiving than I have been. The words followed Wukong as he stormed out of the monastery. The air outside was colder than he remembered, the mountain winds biting at his skin. He paused at the edge of the cliff where he had once stood with Subodhi, the memory taunting him. For a moment, his chest tightened, the weight of what he had lost pressing down on him. But pride is a dangerous thing, and Wukong's pride was a raging inferno. He pushed the feeling away, leaping from the cliff and summoning a cloud to carry him. The sky stretched endlessly before him, a vast expanse that now seemed both inviting and isolating. Wukong soared through the heavens, his heart heavy despite the wind rushing past him. The thrill of freedom was dulled by an ache he couldn't quite name. He told himself it was nothing, that the world awaited him with open arms. Yet, deep within, a seed of uncertainty began to take root. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the world in hues of gold and crimson, Wukong landed in a forest. He stood among the ancient trees, their twisted forms casting long shadows. The silence was deafening, broken only by the rustle of leaves and the distant cry of a bird. Wukong's thoughts turned to Subodhi's parting words, their weight heavier now than before. He clenched his fists, his frustration bubbling over. What does he know? Wukong muttered, his voice barely louder than the wind. I'll show him. I'll show them all. The determination in his heart burned brightly, but so too did the loneliness. For the first time, Wukong realized that the path he had chosen might be more difficult than he had anticipated. The world stretched out before him, vast and unforgiving, and he was alone to face it. But Wukong was no ordinary being. The same fire that had driven him to defy Subodhi now fueled his resolve. He would carve his own path, no matter the cost. The first streaks of dawn painted the sky in fiery hues, a herald of change. The mountain of flowers and fruit stood majestic, its peaks wrapped in mist, its valleys alive with the sound of chirping birds and rustling leaves. Yet beneath the beauty, there was unease. The monkeys, once lively and carefree, moved cautiously, their playful chatter replaced by whispers of fear. The world had grown harsher in Sun Wukong's absence, and without their king, they had been left vulnerable. Then, the wind shifted. A ripple passed through the forest, setting the trees to shuddering as if the mountain itself had taken a breath. The sound of footsteps, steady, deliberate, echoed through the valley. At first, it was faint, almost indistinguishable from the rustle of the leaves, but it grew louder, bolder. At the entrance of the mountain stood a figure unlike any other. Sun Wukong, clad in golden armor that shimmered like the sun, his staff slung across his back, radiated a presence that demanded attention. His piercing gaze swept over the land, taking in every detail, every shadow, every sign of neglect. The monkeys who had dared to gather at the edge of the clearing froze, their wide eyes reflecting awe and disbelief. Your king has returned, Wukong said, his voice calm but powerful. A wave of emotion surged through the crowd. Some burst into cheers, their voices rising in jubilation. Others wept openly, their relief spilling over in tears. Wukong's lips curved into a faint smile as he stepped forward, his movements graceful yet commanding. But Wukong had not come back merely to reclaim his throne. He had returned to rebuild, to strengthen, and to ensure that no force would ever again threaten his kingdom. His time away had not been spent idly. The lessons he had learned, the powers he had mastered, he would use them all for his people. He raised his staff, and with a flick of his wrist, the earth itself seemed to obey. Crumbled walls were restored, overgrown paths cleared, and hidden traps revealed. The monkeys watched in amazement, their trust in their king growing with every display of his newfound abilities. Strength is not enough, Wukong said, his voice carrying across the gathering. We must be united, disciplined, and prepared. Together, we will make this kingdom unbreakable. Under Wukong's guidance, the monkeys trained. They learned to fight, to strategize, to defend their home with courage and skill. Wukong showed them the techniques he had mastered, teaching them not only how to wield weapons, but also how to outthink their enemies. His lessons were tough, his standards high, but he led by example, earning their respect and loyalty. Yet Wukong was not just a warrior. He brought joy and laughter back to the mountain, playing games with the young monkeys, sharing stories of his adventures, and reminding them of the beauty of their home. He was both a leader and a friend, a protector and a source of inspiration. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Wukong stood at the highest peak of the mountain. The monkeys gathered below, their faces turned upward, their eyes filled with gratitude and pride. Wukong raised his staff once more, and this time, the sky itself seemed to respond. Stars appeared, their light brighter than ever, as if celebrating the return of the Monkey King. In that moment, Wukong felt a sense of fulfillment unlike any he had ever known. He had faced exile, mastered powers, and now stood at the pinnacle of his strength. Yet, even as he basked in the adoration of his people, a flicker of restlessness stirred within him. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it a sense of foreboding. Wukong's sharp eyes scanned the horizon, his instincts telling him that his greatest challenges were yet to come. He tightened his grip on his staff, his heart steady but his mind alert. The mountain was safe, for now. But Wukong knew that peace was fragile, and the world beyond the mountain of flowers and fruit held both wonder and danger. The cold silence wrapped around him like a shroud, the air heavy with the weight of unseen forces. Sun Wukong stood at the threshold of a realm where no living being was welcome. Shadows moved without form, and faint whispers seemed to crawl from the depths of the void. The underworld lay ahead, its gates looming in the darkness, guarded by the unseen hands of fear itself. Most would tremble, turn away, or collapse under the crushing dread. But not Wukong. His eyes, fierce and unyielding, burned with defiance. Mortality was a cage he refused to accept, and the hands of fate had pushed him too far. He tightened his grip on his staff, its cold metal steady in his grasp, a reminder of the power he had earned. If Yama, the king of the underworld, thought he could control the Monkey King's destiny, he would soon learn otherwise. The gates creaked open with a sound that seemed to gnaw at the soul, but Wukong walked through without hesitation. The darkness within was alive, curling and shifting around him, trying to smother his light. The pathways twisted unnaturally, yet his steps never faltered. This was no place for the faint of heart, and Wukong's heart was anything but faint. As he moved deeper, the air grew colder, the whispers louder, turning into a cacophony of voices. Accusations, cries, and pleas reached out to him, each trying to claw at his resolve. He stopped for a moment, his chest rising and falling as he let out a long breath. "Fate doesn't decide for me," he said, his voice steady and sharp as a blade. With that, the voices fell silent, recoiling as if they had been struck. The path straightened before him, leading to a vast hall shrouded in shadows. At its center sat Yama, his form towering, his gaze heavy with the authority of countless lifetimes. "Sun Wukong," Yama's voice rumbled, filling the space like thunder. "You tread where you do not belong. Leave now, before I bind your soul to the void forever." Wukong's lips curled into a smirk. "Bind me? You don't control me, Yama. You never have." The king of the underworld rose, his robes flowing like liquid night. His eyes burned like twin coals, piercing and unrelenting. He raised his hand, and the room seemed to shift, pulling at Wukong's very essence, trying to drag him into submission. But Wukong stood firm, his aura flaring with golden brilliance, pushing back the darkness. "You think this is power?" Wukong said, his voice laced with challenge. "Let me show you mine." With a swift motion, he struck the ground with his staff. The hall quaked, cracks spreading like veins as golden light burst forth, driving back the shadows. Yama staggered but held his ground, his face a mask of fury. Wukong moved like a storm, his strikes precise and unrelenting. Yet, he wasn't here just to fight. His true goal lay beyond the throne. Spotting the massive book resting on an ancient pedestal, he felt his resolve harden. The book of life and death, the ledger of every soul's destiny. He charged forward, dodging the tendrils of darkness that lashed out to stop him. With a leap, he landed before the pedestal, the book glowing with a sinister light. Opening it, he scanned the pages, his fingers moving with purpose. And there it was, his name, written in bold, unyielding strokes. For a moment, he stared at it, a representation of a future he refused to accept. Without hesitation, he struck it through with the edge of his staff. The ink bled, the name vanishing as if it had never existed. A wave of energy surged through the room, sending ripples of light and shadow colliding. Yama roared in rage, his power exploding in a torrent of darkness. You dare defy the balance of existence? Wukong turned to face him, his grin unwavering. I don't bow to balance, or to kings. I am Sun Wukong, the great sage equal to heaven. And I decide my fate. The two forces clashed, light against dark, rebellion against order. Each strike shook the underworld to its core, the ground splitting, the walls groaning under the weight of their battle. Wukong's laughter echoed through the chaos, not of arrogance but of freedom. He was unstoppable, a force unbound. As the battle reached its peak, Yama hesitated. Wukong's defiance was unlike anything he had faced. In that moment, the Monkey King seized his chance. With one final strike of his staff, he sent Yama sprawling, the underworld itself trembling in submission. Remember this, Wukong said, standing tall amidst the destruction. You can keep your rules and your order, but they mean nothing to me. The darkness began to recede, the gates opening once more as if compelled by Wukong's will. He walked away without looking back, his staff resting casually on his shoulder. The whispers of the underworld grew quiet, the shadows bowing in his wake. As he stepped into the light of the living world, the sun seemed to shine brighter, the air richer, as if celebrating his return. But Wukong's mind was already racing. Mortality had no hold on him now, but the heavens still loomed above, their power vast and unchallenged. The ocean roared with a fury that seemed to echo the chaos brewing beneath its surface. Waves crashed against the rocks as if the sea itself was warning the world of the coming storm. Beneath those dark waters lay the palace of the Dragon King of the East Sea, a realm of shimmering splendor and ancient power. But tonight, that palace would face a force no treasure or magic could withstand. Sun Wukong stood at the edge of the shore, the salty wind whipping through his fur. His gaze was fixed on the horizon, where the water gleamed like molten silver under the moonlight. The promise of power called to him from the depths, a weapon unlike any other, the Rui Jingu Bang. It was said to be an unbreakable staff, capable of growing or shrinking at will, and he knew it would bow to no one but him. Without hesitation, he leapt into the sea, his form slicing through the waves like a blade. The water around him grew colder as he descended, the sunlight fading into an eerie glow. Schools of fish scattered at his approach, and strange creatures of the deep eyed him warily, sensing the storm within him. The palace emerged from the murk, its golden gates gleaming like a sunken sun. Guards patrolled its entrance, their scales glinting with a faint blue sheen. Wukong grinned, a glint of mischief in his eyes. Stealth was never his style. With a sharp twist of his staff, he struck the gates, the sound reverberating through the sea like a thunderclap. The guards swarmed him, their weapons glinting with magic, but Wukong was unstoppable. He moved like a shadow, his staff spinning and striking with a speed that left no room for retaliation. One by one, the guards fell, their cries fading into the deep as Wukong stormed through the gates. Inside, the Dragon King sat on his throne, his face a mix of anger and disbelief. Who dares disturb the peace of my kingdom? His voice rolled through the hall like an ocean wave, commanding and powerful. Sun Wukong, the Monkey King replied, his voice brimming with audacity. I've come for the treasure you keep hidden. Hand it over, and I might leave the rest of your hoard untouched. The Dragon King's laughter echoed like the roar of a tempest. You think you can waltz into my domain and make demands? Foolish monkey, you will regret this. Rising from his throne, the Dragon King summoned a torrent of water that surged toward Wukong, carrying the weight of the ocean itself. But Wukong stood firm, his staff glowing with a golden light. With a single swing, he parted the wave, the force of his strike sending shockwaves through the palace. The Dragon King lunged, his claws gleaming like polished steel, but Wukong met him head-on. Their clash shook the palace, the walls trembling as their powers collided. Wukong's movements were unpredictable, his strikes relentless, each one driving the Dragon King further back. Finally, Wukong's staff struck the throne itself, cracking it in two. The Dragon King fell to his knees, his breath ragged. Enough, he roared, his voice laced with both fury and resignation. Take what you want and leave. Wukong smirked, his eyes gleaming with triumph. You're learning. He stepped forward, his gaze falling on the Rui Jingu Bang, resting in a place of honor beside the throne. The staff seemed to hum with power, as if recognizing its true master. Grasping it in his hand, Wukong felt a surge of energy unlike anything he had ever known. The staff responded to his will, shrinking to the size of a needle and then expanding to pierce the heavens. He spun it in his hand, its weight perfect, its power intoxicating. But he wasn't done. The palace was a treasure trove of celestial armor and enchanted relics, and Wukong claimed them all. A golden chainmail shirt that shimmered like sunlight on water, a phoenix-feathered cap that seemed to glow with an inner fire, and boots that allowed him to move faster than the wind itself. Each piece he donned added to his aura, making him look less like a monkey and more like a force of nature. As he walked out of the palace, the Dragon King watched in silence, his kingdom humbled and his pride shattered. Wukong's silhouette against the glowing sea was a vision of defiance, a conqueror who answered to no one. The ocean carried him back to the surface, where the air seemed sweeter, the world brighter. But in Wukong's heart, there was no peace. His gaze turned upward, toward the heavens. The treasures of the ocean were his, but the celestial realm still loomed above, untouched, unchallenged. For now. The wind carried whispers of rebellion across the mountain of flowers and fruit, where Sun Wukong stood at the peak, his eyes fixed on the endless skies above. The heavens stretched out in all their untouchable splendor, filled with stars that seemed to mock his place on earth. To the world, he was a king among monkeys, a legend of unstoppable might. Yet, to the heavens, he was nothing. And that, he decided, would no longer stand. His chest rose with each breath, the air crackling around him as if the universe itself was daring him to act. "Great sage equal to heaven," he muttered, tasting the words. They were bold, audacious, a declaration of his worth, a worth that no one could deny. The title rolled off his tongue, filling the air like a roar, a challenge to the gods who sat in their golden palaces. The world had taught him to climb higher, to take what was denied. It was a lesson learned through fire and fury, through countless battles that had shaped him into the being he was now. The Rui Jingu Bang rested in his hand, its weight a reminder of his victories. It had bowed to him, as had the Dragon Kings, as would all who stood in his way. But this wasn't about the treasures or the power. It was about his name echoing across eternity, carved into the very fabric of the cosmos. He would not be forgotten. He would not be ignored. "Call the others," he commanded his subjects. His voice was sharp, cutting through the night like a blade. The monkeys scattered, their excitement barely contained. They had seen their king in his glory, his battles and triumphs, and they knew something monumental was about to unfold. By dawn, the mountain was alive with activity. Thousands of monkeys gathered, their chatter creating a cacophony that echoed through the valleys. In their eyes, Sun Wukong was already a god, a figure of awe and devotion. Standing before them, he raised his hand, silencing the crowd with a single motion. "My brothers and sisters," he began, his voice steady but brimming with fire. "The heavens have long looked down on us. They believe themselves untouchable, their thrones unshakable. But tell me, are they greater than us?" A roar erupted from the crowd, their cries filling the air with defiance. "They call themselves gods," Wukong continued, "but I have seen their weakness. They hide behind their titles, their treasures, their laws. They have no power over us unless we give it to them." His words stirred something primal in the hearts of his followers. They had been outcasts, bound to the earth and its struggles, but in Wukong, they saw their own chains breaking. His defiance was their freedom. "I proclaim myself the great sage equal to heaven," he declared, his voice rising like a storm. "No longer shall we bow, no longer shall we accept their rule. From this day forward, we are their equals." The crowd erupted in cheers, their cries shaking the mountain to its core. Wukong's heart swelled, not with humility, but with triumph. He was no longer just a monkey king. He was a force that the heavens themselves would have to reckon with. But beneath his boldness, there was a quiet, lingering unease, a shadow that clung to the edges of his mind. The gods would not take this lightly. His proclamation was not just a declaration of equality but a declaration of war. And yet, he felt no fear, only the thrill of the coming storm. The days that followed were filled with preparations. Wukong's newfound title spread like wildfire, reaching the ears of mortals and immortals alike. The heavens buzzed with whispers of the audacious monkey who dared to challenge their authority. The Jade Emperor himself heard of it, his serene expression hardening into something unreadable. On the mountain of flowers and fruit, Wukong reveled in his rising power. He wore his celestial armor like a second skin, its golden sheen reflecting the sunlight. The Rui Jingu Bang rested against his throne, a constant reminder of what he had already taken. But his ambition stretched far beyond this mountain, beyond the earth itself. Late one evening, as the stars began to dot the sky, Wukong sat alone at the edge of a cliff. The world below was quiet, its struggles momentarily forgotten. His gaze turned upward once more, toward the heavens that seemed both distant and within reach. "You will remember my name," he whispered, his voice carrying a weight that the universe itself seemed to acknowledge. "Even if it means shaking the very foundations of your golden thrones." In the silence that followed, a faint breeze brushed against him, as if the heavens had heard his words and answered with a warning. But Wukong only smiled. He had made his proclamation. Now, he would see it through. The sky opened with a brilliance that seemed to burn the air itself. Sun Wukong stepped through the shimmering portal into heaven, his fur catching the golden light as his sharp eyes scanned the divine expanse. The celestial court was unlike anything he had ever seen, its grandeur and magnificence crafted to overwhelm the unworthy. But Wukong, standing tall with his Rui Jingu Bang in hand, felt none of the awe the gods might have expected. Instead, his lips curled into a smirk. This was the place that had ignored him, dismissed him, and denied him. Now, they had called him here, offering him a position within their ranks. A hollow gesture, but Wukong had agreed. Not for their approval, but to see their world, to understand the heights they had claimed as their own. He was led by celestial guards, their movements stiff, their faces unreadable. Wukong could feel their disdain, the way their eyes darted to him with barely concealed contempt. It amused him more than it angered him. Let them think him small. Let them believe he didn't belong here. Soon, they would learn. The Jade Emperor's court was a dazzling spectacle, with divine beings seated in rows of blinding splendor. Wukong approached the throne, his footsteps echoing in the vast hall. The Emperor regarded him with a calmness that bordered on arrogance. "Sun Wukong," the Emperor's voice rang out, its tone measured and deliberate. "You have proven yourself formidable. For your skills, we grant you a position within Heaven's administration." The air buzzed with anticipation. Wukong raised an eyebrow, waiting for the declaration of his title. When the words came, they struck like a cold slap. "You shall be the keeper of the heavenly stables." For a moment, the hall was silent. Then, muffled snickers rippled through the crowd, divine beings barely concealing their amusement. Keeper of the stables. A title meant for menial labor. A role assigned not out of respect, but mockery. Wukong's jaw tightened, but his smile didn't waver. He lowered his head in what appeared to be submission. "I am honored to serve heaven," he said, his voice steady, his tone unreadable. The days that followed were a test of endurance, but not in the way the gods intended. Wukong fulfilled his duties, tending to the celestial horses with precision. Yet, every task he completed seemed like a subtle reminder of their attempt to humiliate him. The gods passed by, sneering or ignoring him altogether, believing they had tamed the unruly monkey. But Wukong's mind was a storm. Each moment in those stables fed the fire within him. They had underestimated him. They thought they could reduce him to nothing. But Wukong had learned long ago how to turn insults into strength, how to rise from indignity with even greater resolve. One evening, as the stars glittered above the heavenly palace, Wukong stood amidst the celestial horses, his Rui Jingu Bang resting against his shoulder. His gaze was fixed on the heavens beyond, his thoughts racing. They had caged him here, treating him as an outsider. But they had forgotten something crucial. Wukong was no ordinary being. He was born from the essence of stone and sky, molded by the winds of freedom. No chains, no titles, no ridicule could hold him. Without warning, Wukong burst into motion. The stables shook as he unleashed his power, his staff transforming into a whirlwind of destruction. The celestial horses reared and neighed in panic as the stable walls crumbled under his might. The commotion drew the attention of the guards, but by the time they arrived, Wukong was already gone. He didn't stop until he reached the Jade Emperor's court. The gods assembled there were unprepared for the sight of Wukong, his eyes blazing with fury, his staff glowing with power. "Keeper of the stables?" Wukong shouted, his voice echoing through the grand hall. "Is that how you show respect to someone who stood before you as an equal? You mock me, but you forget that I am Sun Wukong. I bow to no one." The gods scrambled to respond, their cries mingling in chaos. But Wukong didn't wait for an answer. With a leap, he shattered the palace gates, leaving the celestial court in disarray. When Wukong returned to the mountain of flowers and fruit, his followers greeted him with cries of triumph. He stood before them, his chest heaving, his mind racing. Heaven had tried to break him, but instead, they had ignited a rebellion that would shake the cosmos. He had tasted their arrogance, and now, he would make them taste his wrath. The heavens roared with fury as golden clouds darkened, charged with divine anger. The Jade Emperor's decision was final. Sun Wukong's defiance had gone too far. No longer would heaven tolerate the Monkey King's arrogance. The order was given, and the celestial drums began to thunder. An army unlike any other was summoned, its ranks filled with immortal generals, heavenly beasts, and divine soldiers armed with weapons forged in the fires of eternity. But on the mountain of flowers and fruit, there was no fear. The Monkey King sat on his stone throne, the Rui Jingu Bang resting casually across his lap. His fiery eyes scanned the horizon, waiting. He had heard the news of heaven's campaign, and the thought of battle brought a wicked grin to his face. Let them come, he thought. Let them bring their greatest warriors. The first wave arrived in a burst of light, their celestial banners fluttering against the wind. At their head was a proud general, his armor gleaming like the sun. He raised his sword high and called out in a voice that shook the mountains, demanding Wukong's surrender. Wukong stepped forward, his movements unhurried, his expression unreadable. He didn't speak. Instead, he lifted his staff and slammed it into the ground. The impact sent shockwaves across the mountain, and the earth groaned in defiance. The celestial forces faltered for a moment, but then their general charged, leading his army forward with a battle cry. The clash that followed was chaos incarnate. Wukong leapt into the fray with a ferocity that stunned even the gods. His staff became a blur, striking with the force of 1,000 storms. Divine swords shattered against his unyielding defense, and heavenly beasts recoiled under his might. He moved like a tempest, unrelenting and unstoppable, his laughter ringing out over the cries of the defeated. More generals were sent, each more powerful than the last. The 4 heavenly kings, commanders of vast celestial armies, descended upon the mountain. They unleashed weapons imbued with divine power, summoning winds, fire, and lightning to subdue the unruly king. But Wukong was prepared. With a flick of his wrist, his staff expanded, its size matching the immensity of their onslaught. He swung it with devastating precision, scattering their forces like leaves in a storm. Yet the battles were not without cost. The mountain bore the scars of divine fury, trees burned, rocks shattered, and streams ran red with the sweat and blood of conflict. Wukong's loyal subjects fought bravely by his side, but they were not immortals. He could feel their strength waning, their spirits strained by the endless waves of celestial might. Still, Wukong stood unbowed. His determination burned brighter with each confrontation. This wasn't just a fight for his freedom. It was a statement, a challenge to the heavens themselves. He would not kneel. He would not yield. The Jade Emperor, furious at the Monkey King's unrelenting defiance, called upon the mightiest warrior of heaven, Erlang Shen. Known for his unmatched strength and third eye that pierced through all illusions, Erlang descended to the mountain with a calm that masked his lethal intent. Their confrontation was unlike anything the heavens or earth had ever witnessed. Wukong and Erlang clashed with such force that the sky trembled and the seas quaked. Wukong's cunning met Erlang's precision in a dance of chaos and skill. They fought across the mountain, their battle carrying them to the heavens and back again. No ground was safe, no moment was without peril. Erlang's third eye shone with an intense light, seeking to expose Wukong's vulnerabilities. But the Monkey King had no intention of being seen through. He shifted forms, becoming a bird, a fish, a cloud of smoke, evading and countering with a mastery that left even Erlang impressed. But the fight dragged on, and the heavens grew impatient. The Jade Emperor called upon Laozi, the great alchemist of heaven, who unleashed his golden rope to bind the Monkey King. While Wukong was distracted by his battle with Erlang, the rope tightened around him, its divine power sapping his strength. For the first time, the Monkey King faltered. Bound and surrounded, his enemies closing in, the mountain grew silent. But even in that moment of near defeat, Wukong's eyes blazed with defiance. This wasn't over. It could never be over. The palace garden stretched endlessly, a haven of divine beauty. Trees stood tall with branches heavy with celestial peaches, their golden skins shimmering like trapped sunlight. Each fruit held the essence of immortality, a taste that could grant endless life and untold power. The air was thick with an intoxicating sweetness, and beneath the canopy of these sacred trees, the gods and goddesses had gathered for the grand immortal peach banquet. But this was no ordinary night. Unseen by the revelers, a shadow moved between the trees, silent and deliberate. It was Sun Wukong, his mischievous grin sharper than the edge of any blade. He had not been invited, of course, but Sun Wukong had little regard for rules meant to keep him out. His fiery eyes scanned the banquet, catching glimpses of golden platters laden with treasures of the heavens, jeweled goblets filled with celestial wine, delicacies too exquisite for mortal tongues. And at the center of it all, the peaches of immortality. His stomach growled, a low, almost primal sound, and he chuckled under his breath. These gods thought themselves untouchable, their privileges sacrosanct. Wukong, however, saw no reason why he shouldn't help himself. After all, had he not bested their armies? Had he not proved himself their equal, if not their better? Slipping closer, he moved like a whisper, his steps so light they barely disturbed the grass beneath him. The gods were too engrossed in their laughter and revelry to notice. Their wine flowed freely, and their voices grew louder, masking the rustle of leaves as Wukong climbed one of the ancient trees. There, nestled among the branches, was a peach unlike any he had ever seen. It was larger than his fist, its skin glistening with tiny droplets of dew that shimmered in the moonlight. Wukong plucked it with reverence, his fingers tingling as he felt the fruit's energy coursing through him. The first bite was electric. The juice burst on his tongue, rich and sweet, filling his body with a warmth that seemed to stretch into eternity. He laughed quietly, savoring the forbidden taste. One peach became two, then three. He couldn't stop. With each bite, he felt stronger, more alive, as though the boundaries of his existence were expanding. Below, the banquet continued. The gods toasted one another, raising their cups in celebration. None of them suspected that the treasure they revered most was being devoured above their heads. Wukong, now emboldened by the peach's power, swung down from the tree and landed silently among the platters of food. The golden goblets caught his eye next. He lifted one to his lips, the heavenly wine spilling over as he drank greedily. Its taste was intoxicating, a blend of sweetness and fire that ignited his spirit. He grabbed another, and then another, the thrill of his defiance making him careless. A goddess turned, her laughter dying in her throat as she saw the intruder standing among them, a goblet raised in a mocking toast. The music faltered, the conversation stopped, and every divine face turned toward Wukong. The silence was shattered by his laugh, a wild, unrepentant sound that echoed across the garden. "Ah, what a feast you've laid out for me," he exclaimed, holding up a half-eaten peach. "Surely, you didn't mean to keep such treasures from the great sage equal to heaven." The gods rose in outrage, their anger burning like a wildfire. The Jade Emperor's envoy stepped forward, demanding that Wukong be seized at once. But before a single hand could touch him, the Monkey King leapt onto the banquet table, scattering plates and goblets in his wake. His staff appeared in his hand as if summoned by his will, and with a single sweep, he sent the approaching soldiers flying. The banquet erupted into chaos. Wukong fought with the glee of a child at play, his movements impossibly quick, his strikes devastating. The gods, unused to such blatant defiance, struggled to contain him. But for every move they made, Wukong had already made two more. He was untouchable, a storm that couldn't be captured. Peaches and wine spilled onto the ground, their divine essence seeping into the soil as the battle raged on. Wukong laughed as he dodged their attacks, his joy infectious even in the face of their fury. But beneath his amusement was a deeper satisfaction, a sense of triumph over those who had dismissed him, who had tried to contain his spirit. As the gods regrouped, summoning their most powerful spells and weapons, Wukong leapt high into the air, his staff glowing with the light of 100 battles. He didn't linger to see their retaliation. With a final, mocking bow, he disappeared into the night, leaving the banquet in ruins and the gods humiliated. But the taste of peaches lingered on his tongue, and with it came a hunger for more freedom, more power, more of what the heavens sought to deny him. The chaos he had left behind was only the beginning. The air in the celestial palace was thick with the scent of alchemical smoke, a heady mixture of rare herbs and divine ingredients burning in Laozi's furnace. This was no ordinary workshop. It was the heart of creation itself, where the secrets of immortality were forged into elixirs and pills. The flames danced with a life of their own, their colors shifting between gold, azure, and crimson, a reflection of their mystical power. Every piece of this sacred place was crafted for perfection, for eternity. And it was here that Sun Wukong set his sights. Sun Wukong crouched just beyond the threshold of Laozi's lab, his fiery eyes glowing with mischief and greed. The dull hum of the furnace filled his ears, mingling with the faint crackle of embers. He had tasted the peaches of immortality, drank the wine of the gods, and walked away from their wrath. But even that was not enough. The whispers of Laozi's celestial pills had reached him, little beads of perfection, forged over centuries, each one holding power beyond comprehension. He slipped inside, his movements quick and fluid, like a shadow dancing on the edges of the light. The room was vast, lined with shelves crammed with ancient scrolls, rare ingredients, and tools that glimmered with celestial energy. In the center, the furnace roared, its heat so intense it made the air ripple. Sun Wukong felt its power claw at his skin, but he did not flinch. His gaze locked onto a small jade box resting on a pedestal. Even from a distance, he could feel the potency of what lay within. The pills of immortality. Their energy pulsed in rhythm with the furnace, as though they were alive, waiting for a soul bold enough or foolish enough to claim them. He approached the pedestal, each step slow and deliberate. His senses were sharp, every fiber of his being on high alert. The gods would have placed wards, traps, something to guard such a treasure. But as he reached out, his fingers brushing against the cool jade, he found nothing to stop him. The box opened with a soft click, revealing rows of perfectly formed pills, each one glowing faintly with an inner light. Wukong's breath hitched. He could feel the power emanating from them, a heady mixture of vitality and eternity. Without hesitation, he took one and swallowed it whole. The transformation was instant. A rush of energy surged through his body, making his skin tingle and his veins burn with new life. He staggered back, clutching his chest as the power coursed through him, changing him. His senses sharpened further, his strength multiplied. The furnace's heat no longer felt oppressive, it felt like a part of him. But one pill wasn't enough. The hunger inside him roared louder than ever. He grabbed another, then another, until the box was empty, and his laughter echoed through the lab. He felt invincible, untouchable, as though nothing in heaven or earth could challenge him now. The furnace flared suddenly, as if in protest. The room filled with a blinding light, and from the flames, a figure emerged. Laozi himself, his face stern and his eyes burning with anger, stood before Wukong. The celestial sage raised his hand, and the furnace roared louder, its flames twisting into shapes of beasts and warriors. "You dare!" Laozi's voice was thunderous, shaking the very foundations of the palace. "You dare steal the work of centuries, the essence of the heavens?" But Sun Wukong, emboldened by his newfound power, did not cower. He raised his staff, its golden surface gleaming in the furnace's light. "I take what I deserve," he said, his voice calm but firm. "If the heavens refuse to see my worth, I will carve my path with my own hands." The battle that followed was unlike anything the celestial palace had ever witnessed. The furnace's flames became living entities, leaping and striking with the ferocity of dragons. Laozi summoned all the power of his alchemy, hurling spells and energies that could shatter mountains. But Wukong was faster, stronger. His staff moved like lightning, deflecting every attack, breaking through every defense. The lab became a whirlwind of destruction. Shelves toppled, ingredients spilled, and the furnace itself began to crack under the strain. Yet, Wukong pressed on, his laughter ringing above the chaos. He was unstoppable, a force of nature that could not be contained. In a final act of defiance, Wukong swung his staff with all his might, striking the furnace and shattering it into pieces. Flames and smoke erupted, filling the room with an intense heat that sent Laozi reeling. When the smoke cleared, Wukong stood alone, his staff resting on his shoulder, his grin as defiant as ever. He turned to Laozi, who now lay on the ground, weakened and defeated. "Your pills were exquisite," Wukong said, his tone mocking. "But next time, make something truly worthy of the great sage equal to heaven." With that, he leapt through the ruined ceiling, disappearing into the night, leaving behind a lab in ruins and a sage filled with anger and humiliation. The energy of the stolen pills coursed through him as he soared through the skies, each leap taking him further from the heavens that sought to control him. But even as he relished his triumph, the fire within him burned brighter, hungrier. This was not the end. This was only the beginning. The sky was a battlefield, painted with the clash of fire and lightning. Celestial armies, their shimmering armor reflecting the chaos, fought with desperation, their formations crumbling under the relentless assault of Sun Wukong. His golden staff tore through the air, its strike splitting clouds and shaking the heavens. The Monkey King was untouchable, his laughter a taunt that echoed through the trembling skies. The Jade Emperor watched from his throne, his face pale with a mix of fear and fury. Every tactic, every warrior, every ounce of divine might had been hurled at Wukong, and still, he stood. The heavens themselves seemed to buckle under his defiance. "Call him," the Emperor finally whispered, his voice carrying the weight of defeat. Far away, beyond the heavens, in a realm untouched by the chaos, Buddha sat in stillness. His gaze was soft, his expression unchanging, as the messenger arrived, trembling and urgent. He listened, his eyes closing for a moment as though mourning what was to come. When he opened them, there was no hesitation. He rose. The battlefield grew quiet as a great golden light spread across the horizon, warm yet overwhelming. The celestial forces stopped their retreat, their faces turning toward the source. Even Sun Wukong, his staff poised mid-swing, froze. The light washed over him, not with the heat of anger, but with the weight of inevitability. From the heart of the light, Buddha appeared, his presence so vast and tranquil that even the heavens seemed to bow. His steps were unhurried, his eyes meeting Wukong's with neither judgment nor anger, only understanding. "You've caused much pain, Wukong," Buddha said, his voice calm, steady. "But your anger is a flame that consumes you as much as it burns others. Do you not tire of this?" Wukong's laughter cracked through the silence, sharp and unyielding. "Tire? I am alive. I am free. Your rules, your chains, your mountains, they mean nothing to me." He spun his staff, its golden gleam defiant against the radiance of Buddha's presence. "Come, then. Let us see if even you can hold me." The clash was instant, ferocious. Wukong moved with blinding speed, his staff aimed with deadly precision. Buddha countered, his movements serene but unshakable. Each strike of the staff was met with an invisible barrier, each attack a ripple against an ocean. Wukong grew faster, his strikes more frantic, his roars filling the air. But no matter how he moved, Buddha was there, unmoved, unbroken. The calmness in Buddha's face was maddening, a mirror to Wukong's chaos, reflecting his desperation back at him. "You are strong, Wukong," Buddha said, his voice carrying through the battlefield like a gentle breeze. "But strength without peace is like a river without a course, it only floods and destroys." Wukong screamed, a sound of fury and despair. He leapt high into the air, his staff raised to split the heavens themselves. But before he could strike, Buddha raised his hand. In an instant, the golden light expanded, consuming everything in its path. When the light faded, Wukong was gone. The celestial armies stood in stunned silence, their eyes scanning the empty sky. Then they saw it, a mountain, vast and unyielding, its peaks crowned with the 5 elements. Beneath it, trapped, was the Monkey King. His roars echoed from the depths of the mountain, muffled but fierce. His hands clawed at the earth, his strength unrelenting, but the mountain did not move. The weight of the 5 elements, earth, water, fire, wood, and metal, pressed down on him, unshakable, inescapable. Buddha stood before the mountain, his gaze heavy with sorrow. "This is not punishment, Wukong," he said softly. "It is a chance for reflection, for growth. The heavens may bind your body, but only you can free your heart." The winds carried Wukong's cries across the heavens, a haunting reminder of what happens when strength and pride eclipse compassion. Yet, even as the celestial forces began to disperse, their victory bittersweet, the mountain seemed to hum with life. The Monkey King was not one to be silenced. The mountain loomed silently against the horizon, an ancient sentinel under a canopy of shifting clouds. For 500 years, its unyielding weight held a secret, a restless spirit, defiant yet broken, bound in silence. Sun Wukong, once the unstoppable Monkey King, lay beneath the 5 elements mountain, his body caged but his mind untamed. The world moved on, seasons danced, and empires rose and fell, but his cries were muffled, unheard by the stars above. It was on a day like no other that footsteps approached the base of the mountain. The air seemed to hold its breath, as if recognizing a presence destined to change the course of the heavens and earth. Tang Sanzang, the monk chosen for a sacred mission, walked with deliberate steps, his saffron robes swaying gently in the breeze. His heart carried the weight of a divine calling, to journey west and retrieve the scriptures that promised enlightenment to a weary world. The stillness of the mountain was broken by a faint sound, a voice, hoarse and edged with bitterness. "Who walks so boldly near my prison?" Wukong's words, though weakened by centuries of confinement, still carried the remnants of his defiance. Sanzang paused, his eyes scanning the barren landscape until they fell upon a faint glow beneath the mountain's base. He knelt, placing his hands on the cool earth, and spoke with a voice that resonated with compassion. "I am Tang Sanzang, a humble servant of the Buddha. Tell me, who are you?" There was silence, then a laugh, sharp and tinged with pain. "Humble servant, you say? Do you know who lies beneath this cursed mountain? I am Sun Wukong, the great sage equal to heaven. I shattered armies, defied gods, and roared louder than thunder itself. And yet, here I rot, forgotten." Sanzang's expression softened. "Great sage, your strength is undeniable, but strength without purpose leads only to ruin. Perhaps your time here was not to punish, but to prepare you for something greater." Wukong's laughter faded, replaced by a long silence. The monk's words lingered, unsettling him in a way no chains ever could. "Why are you here, monk? What purpose could you possibly have with someone like me?" "I seek the scriptures in the West," Sanzang replied simply. "The journey is perilous, and I am but a mortal. Yet, I was told that a guardian lies beneath this mountain, a warrior who could walk beside me, not as a servant, but as a companion." The air grew heavy. For centuries, Wukong had dreamed of freedom, but always for vengeance, for conquest. Now, faced with this monk's unwavering gaze, he felt something stir, a flicker of something he hadn't known in eons, hope. "Free me," Wukong said at last, his voice raw. "I will protect you, but make no mistake, I am not a saint." My hands are stained with the blood of gods and demons alike. Sanzang stood, his hands pressing together in prayer. Even the darkest night can give way to dawn, he said softly. With that, he began to chant, his voice weaving through the air like a gentle current. The ground trembled. The mountain groaned as cracks snaked across its surface. Light burst forth, and with a deafening roar, the mountain shattered. From the rubble emerged Sun Wukong, his form weathered but his spirit unbroken. He stood tall, his golden eyes gleaming with a mix of exhaustion and renewed purpose. For a moment, he simply stared at Sanzang, his gaze unreadable. Then, with a deep bow, he spoke. I owe you my freedom, monk. I will guard you with my life, though the heavens may tremble once more. As they began their journey, the wind carried a whisper, a promise of trials yet to come, of bonds forged in fire, and of a destiny that would reshape them both. Wukong walked beside Sanzang, the weight of his staff a comforting reminder of who he was, and who he could become. The horizon stretched before them, endless and uncertain, as the echoes of their first steps faded into the unknown. The air was heavy with unspoken tension as Tang Sanzang and Sun Wukong made their way through a dense forest, the sunlight splintering through the canopy above. Wukong moved with his usual swagger, his iron staff resting on his shoulder, his golden eyes scanning their surroundings with restless energy. Freedom had been a gift, but it had not tamed his fiery nature. He was quick to anger, quicker still to defy, and his pride remained an unyielding force. Tang Sanzang observed him quietly. The monk's heart was burdened by a quiet realization: Wukong's strength could protect him, but his recklessness could also lead to disaster. It was then that the Bodhisattva Guanyi's earlier words echoed in Sanzang's mind: his power must be tempered, or it will destroy him. The solution came in the form of a golden circlet, a relic blessed with divine power. Sanzang carried it in his robes, hesitant but resolved. He waited until they reached a clearing, the light around them shifting into hues of gold and crimson as the sun dipped lower in the sky. Wukong, Sanzang began, his voice steady but laced with an edge of sadness. The Monkey King turned, his expression guarded. What is it, master? Do you fear something? Let me handle it. It's not the dangers outside that concern me, Sanzang said softly. It's the storms within. Wukong frowned, the words cutting deeper than he expected. He lowered his staff, his sharp gaze fixed on the monk. Speak plainly. What are you trying to say? Sanzang reached into his robes and withdrew the golden circlet. Its surface shimmered faintly, as though alive with energy. This is a binding circlet. It is meant to guide you, to keep you from letting your power and anger rule you. For a moment, silence fell between them. Then Wukong's laugh erupted, loud and mocking. You wish to bind me? The great sage equal to heaven? I tore through the armies of heaven itself, and you think a trinket will control me? Sanzang's calm did not waver. It is not control that I seek. It is balance. Without it, your strength will consume you, and our mission will fail. Will you wear it willingly, or must I place it upon you myself? Wukong's laughter ceased, his expression darkening. You insult me, monk. I swore to protect you, and you repay me with shackles? Sanzang held the circlet out, his gaze unflinching. The choice is yours. But know this, true strength lies in mastering oneself, not in destroying others. The word struck Wukong like a blow. His pride demanded defiance, but another part of him, a quieter, forgotten part, recognized the truth in Sanzang's eyes. With a growl, he snatched the circlet from the monk's hands. Very well, he spat. But if this binds me, it will also remind me of the insult you've dealt me today. He placed the circlet on his head, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then, as Sanzang began to chant, the circlet tightened. A sharp pain shot through Wukong's skull, unlike anything he had ever known. He cried out, dropping to his knees as the golden band glowed fiercely. Stop, he roared, his voice trembling with both rage and agony. Stop this, or I will. But the words caught in his throat as the pain subsided. He gasped for breath, his body trembling, his pride shattered. He glared up at Sanzang, his golden eyes now clouded with a mix of anger and betrayal. "You've made your point, monk," he growled. "But never forget, I am still Sun Wukong. This circlet may bind my actions, but it will not break my spirit." Sanzang nodded, his heart heavy. "I do not wish to break you, Wukong. I only wish to walk beside you, with trust and harmony." The Monkey King rose slowly, his staff clutched tightly in his hand. He said nothing as he turned and began walking once more, his steps heavier than before. The golden circlet gleamed faintly in the fading light, a symbol of both his restraint and his unresolved defiance. As they moved forward, the forest seemed to shift around them, the shadows lengthening, the whispers of the wind carrying the promise of trials yet to come. Wukong's heart burned, not just with the sting of humiliation, but with the determination to prove that no binding, mortal or divine, could extinguish the fire that made him who he was. The journey continued, each step echoing with the unspoken tension between the monk and the warrior as they ventured toward the unknown. The air was thick with the scent of soil and rain as Tang Sanzang, Sun Wukong, and their small band trudged through a desolate mountain pass. The wind howled like a mourning spirit, carrying with it the cries of the wild. Wukong moved ahead, his staff at the ready, his sharp gaze piercing the encroaching darkness. Sanzang followed, his expression calm but weary, the weight of their mission etched into every line on his face. Then, from the shadows, came a sound that froze them all, a laugh, deep and gruff, like a boar snorting through a thicket. Wukong stiffened, his grip on his staff tightening. "Something's coming," he warned, his voice low but charged. From behind a boulder, a figure emerged. He was enormous, his belly round like a harvest mown, his face a strange mixture of human and pig. His small, squinting eyes glinted with mischief, and his wide grin revealed tusks that gleamed under the pale moonlight. In his hands, he clutched a nine-toothed rake, its metal prongs shimmering ominously. "Well, what do we have here?" the pig-faced man rumbled, his voice dripping with mockery. "A monk and his pet monkey, wandering into my domain. Brave or foolish?" Wukong stepped forward, his staff raised. "Who are you to challenge me?" he barked, his voice ringing with pride. "Do you know who I am?" The stranger laughed, his belly shaking with mirth. "Oh, I know you, Monkey King. Your tales have reached even these mountains. But I'm Zhu Beiji, the marshal of the heavenly canopy, once a general of the Jade Emperor himself. And you? You're just a troublemaker who got kicked out of heaven." Wukong's eyes burned with fury, and for a moment, it seemed a clash was inevitable. But Sanzang stepped between them, his voice calm yet commanding. "Enough," he said, his gaze steady on Zhu Beiji. "You are no longer a marshal, and your actions now reflect a spirit lost in darkness. But perhaps there's still light in you, waiting to be rekindled." Beiji's grin faltered, his rake lowering slightly. "Light," he muttered, almost to himself. For a moment, his expression softened, revealing a flicker of the man he once was before his fall from grace. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by defiance. "And what would you know of my path, monk?" "Only that redemption is possible for those who seek it," Sanzang replied, his tone unwavering. A heavy silence fell, the tension thick enough to cut. Then, with a reluctant grunt, Beiji lowered his rake. "Fine," he said, his voice gruff. "I'll join you, for now. But don't think I'm doing this out of the goodness of my heart." Wukong scowled, his pride stung by the exchange. But Sanzang placed a hand on his shoulder, a silent reminder of their purpose. They moved forward, their group now larger, yet no less burdened by the weight of the journey ahead. The landscape shifted as they descended from the mountains, the air growing heavier with the scent of water and decay. They reached a murky river, its surface churning as if alive with unseen dangers. On the opposite bank, a figure loomed, tall and gaunt, his face marked by deep lines and a sadness that seemed to seep into the very ground he stood on. This was Xiao Wujing, the former curtain-lifting general of heaven. His appearance was terrifying, a necklace of skulls draped around his neck, his skin darkened from years of exile. Yet his eyes betrayed a depth of sorrow that words could not capture. As the group approached, Wujing raised his weapon, a spiked staff that seemed almost an extension of his own tortured soul. "Turn back," he growled, his voice low and menacing. "This river is my domain. None may cross without facing me." Beiji snorted, his grip tightening on his rake. "Another exile trying to play king," he muttered. But Sanzang raised a hand, silencing them. "You carry great pain," he said, addressing Wujing directly. "Yet pain need not be a chain that binds you. It can be the fire that forges something greater." Wujing hesitated, his grip on his staff loosening. "You speak of things I've long forgotten," he said, his voice trembling. "The heavens abandoned me. What could I possibly offer now?" "Your strength, your wisdom, and your willingness to rise above the past," Sanzang replied. Wujing lowered his staff, his expression torn between hope and despair. Then, with a heavy sigh, he stepped forward, crossing the river in a single bound. "If you believe there's still worth in me," he said, his voice quiet, "then I will follow you. But I warn you, my darkness may yet consume me." "Then let your darkness walk beside our light," Sanzang said, his tone resolute. As Wujing joined their ranks, the group felt both stronger and more fragile. Each member carried their own scars, their own battles yet to be won. And as they moved onward, the horizon seemed both closer and infinitely far away, its promise both daunting and alluring. The forest was eerily silent, save for the rustling of leaves and the faint wind. Tang Sanzang held the reins of his horse tightly as they moved along a narrow path, the light of the setting sun casting long shadows across their faces. The others followed close behind, their weapons at the ready. Even Sun Wukong, usually brimming with confidence, seemed unusually tense. There was something about this place, an unsettling energy that prickled at the edge of their senses. Then it came, a sound unlike any other. A roar, deep and guttural, rolled through the air like thunder, shaking the ground beneath their feet. The horse reared in panic, nearly throwing Sanzang to the ground. From the shadows emerged a massive creature, its form both majestic and terrifying. A dragon, its silver scales gleaming like liquid moonlight, coiled its massive body around the trees. Its eyes burned like twin suns, their intensity unyielding. Smoke curled from its nostrils, and its claws tore into the earth with an effortless power that spoke of untamed strength. "Stay back!" Wukong shouted, spinning his staff. Zhu Beiji and Xiao Wujing stepped forward, their weapons drawn, their faces a mixture of fear and determination. But the dragon did not attack. It loomed there, its eyes fixed on Sanzang. And when it spoke, its voice was like the rolling waves of an endless sea. "You dare tread upon my domain, mortal? Have you come to challenge me?" Sanzang stepped forward, his voice calm but unwavering. "I am here not to fight, but to seek truth and bring enlightenment. Your strength could serve a greater purpose than guarding these woods in isolation." The dragon let out a low, rumbling laugh, its scales shimmering as it shifted its massive body. "Enlightenment? What does a creature like you know of my burdens?" it snarled. "I was once a prince, proud and honored. But a single act of defiance condemned me to this form. I am bound to these woods, cursed to roam endlessly without a purpose. Why should I care for your mission?" Wukong narrowed his eyes. "You think you're the only one who's suffered?" he shot back, his voice laced with anger. "We've all faced exile, humiliation, and pain. But we chose to fight for something greater than ourselves." The dragon's gaze flicked to Wukong, then to the others. Its fiery eyes softened, just slightly, as if something in Wukong's words had struck a chord. For a long moment, the creature was silent, the only sound the rustling of leaves in the breeze. "I sense sincerity in your words," the dragon said finally, its voice quieter now, tinged with something that might have been hope. "But what can I offer? My strength is bound to this form." Sanzang's eyes shone with determination. "You can offer loyalty, courage, and the will to rise above what binds you. Redemption is not granted, it is earned." The dragon tilted its massive head, its expression unreadable. Then, slowly, it began to change. Its body shimmered, the silver scales dissolving like mist, until what stood before them was not a dragon, but a noble white horse. Its coat was as radiant as fresh snow, its eyes still carrying the wisdom and sorrow of its former self. "I will follow you," the dragon-turned horse said, its voice now softer, yet no less resolute. "But know this, I am not yet free of my sins. Should I falter, it is up to you to guide me back." Sanzang stepped forward, placing a hand on the horse's mane. "Then let us walk this path together," he said, his voice steady. As the group continued their journey, the tension that had hung over them seemed to ease, replaced by a fragile sense of unity. Yet, in the distance, the horizon loomed, shrouded in the unknown, its challenges still waiting to test their newfound bond. The air hung heavy with an unnatural stillness, as though the forest itself held its breath. Tang Sanzang sat quietly atop the white dragon horse, his eyes scanning the path ahead, oblivious to the shadows shifting around him. Sun Wukong, ever alert, gripped his staff tightly, his sharp eyes flickering toward the treetops. Zhu Beiji trudged behind, grumbling softly, while Xiao Wujing remained silent, his broad shoulders tense. A sudden chill swept through the air, and the faint rustle of leaves became a whispering voice. "So, this is the one," it hissed, dripping with malice. Before anyone could react, the path ahead erupted in a burst of dark flames. From the inferno stepped a grotesque figure, its form towering and twisted. Its eyes glowed with a sickly green light, and its mouth curled into a cruel grin. Tang Sanzang's breath caught in his throat, but he held his ground. Sun Wukong stepped forward, his staff slamming into the ground with a force that sent a shockwave rippling through the earth. "Show yourself," he roared, his voice a challenge that echoed through the forest. The demon emerged fully from the shadows, its body cloaked in shifting smoke. "Ah, the great Sun Wukong," it sneered. "Protector of a mortal monk. How far the mighty have fallen." Wukong's eyes blazed with fury, but he didn't strike, yet. Instead, he positioned himself protectively in front of Tang Sanzang, his muscles coiled like a spring. "Say what you want about me," he growled. "But touch the monk, and you'll wish you hadn't." The demon let out a guttural laugh, its voice grating like metal scraping against stone. "You think you can protect him? He carries a light too bright for this world. It's a beacon, drawing us to him like moths to a flame. And you, Monkey King, are nothing but an obstacle." Without warning, it lunged, its claws slicing through the air with terrifying speed. Wukong met the attack head-on, his staff spinning like a whirlwind. The clash of their strikes sent sparks flying, lighting up the dim forest like bursts of lightning. Zhu Beiji charged forward, his rake raised high. "You think you can outmatch all of us?" he bellowed, swinging his weapon with surprising ferocity. The demon dodged, its movements fluid and unnatural, but the sheer force of Beiji's attack drove it back a step. Xiao Wujing joined the fray, his crescent blade cutting through the air with deadly precision. His silent determination was a stark contrast to Beiji's loud fury, yet together they created a rhythm, a relentless assault that left the demon little room to counter. But it was cunning. As Wukong landed a heavy blow to its chest, it let out a cry that wasn't pain, but strategy. From the shadows, smaller figures emerged, minions, their twisted forms just as grotesque as their master. They swarmed toward Tang Sanzang, their claws outstretched and their eyes filled with hunger. The monk barely had time to react before the white dragon horse reared up, its powerful hooves striking down the nearest attackers. Wukong's voice cut through the chaos like a whip. "Protect the monk," he shouted, his staff a blur as he fought to keep the larger demon at bay. Zhu Beiji and Xiao Wujing turned their attention to the swarm, their weapons sweeping through the mass with brutal efficiency. Beiji's rake tore through the minions like a farmer clearing a field, while Wujing's blade moved like water, precise and unyielding. Sanzang clutched his prayer beads, his lips moving in silent invocation. The air around him seemed to shimmer, a faint glow emanating from his form. The minions hesitated, their dark eyes narrowing in confusion and fear, but the larger demon roared, its voice a command that sent them surging forward once more. Sun Wukong's battle with the leader reached a fever pitch. The demon's attacks grew more erratic, its frustration evident as it failed to land a decisive blow. Wukong's staff was relentless, a weapon of pure willpower and skill. He danced around his opponent, striking with a precision that forced the creature to retreat step by step. Finally, with a powerful swing, Wukong's staff connected with the demon's head, sending it crashing to the ground. It let out a roar of pain, its form flickering like a dying flame. But even as it fell, the demon smiled, its teeth gleaming like knives. "You think this is over?" it rasped, its voice filled with malice. "He will never be safe. You cannot fight us all." Wukong raised his staff, ready to strike the final blow, but Sanzang's voice stopped him. "Enough," the monk said, his tone calm but firm. The demon sneered, its form dissolving into smoke. "You are a fool," it hissed as it vanished, leaving behind only the faint scent of ash. The forest fell silent once more, the tension hanging thick in the air. Wukong turned to Sanzang, his expression a mixture of frustration and concern. "You spared it," he said, his voice low. "I did," Sanzang replied, meeting Wukong's gaze. "Because mercy is a strength, not a weakness." The Monkey King let out a long breath, his grip on his staff loosening. Zhu Beiji and Xiao Wujing approached, their weapons resting at their sides, their faces weary but determined. The group stood together, their bond tested and strengthened by the encounter. But the path ahead stretched endlessly into the unknown, and the shadows seemed to grow darker with each step. The wind howled through the barren mountains, biting at their skin like 1,000 sharp needles. Tang Sanzang, the monk, pressed on, his every step a quiet testament to his unwavering resolve. The path ahead was treacherous, but he walked with the weight of 1,000 prayers on his shoulders, unaware of the looming darkness that awaited him. Sun Wukong, ever vigilant, scanned the landscape, his senses sharp, attuned to every flicker in the air, every whisper in the wind. He had fought countless foes, faced unimaginable dangers, but something in the air felt different now. The stillness was suffocating. His eyes darted from shadow to shadow, searching for any sign of what was to come. Then, a soft laugh, a chilling, unnerving sound, echoed from the distance. It was low at first, almost like the wind itself was mocking them, but it quickly grew louder, more distinct. Wukong's heart skipped a beat, a sense of dread crawling up his spine. He turned to the others, his eyes narrowing. "Stay alert," he warned, his voice low, almost a growl. Before anyone could respond, a figure emerged from the mist. It was a woman, tall and regal, her features hauntingly beautiful. Her skin was pale as bone, her eyes hollow and dark. She moved with an eerie grace, her every step calculated, as if she knew she was being watched. But there was something unnatural about her, something cold, something predatory. The white bone spirit had arrived. Her gaze locked onto Sanzang, and a smile crept across her face, soft, seductive, but in its core, twisted with malice. She spoke, her voice soft, almost too sweet, as if trying to lure them into a trap. "Oh, dear monk," she purred. "How I've waited for you. You carry something more precious than all the treasures in the world. I can feel it. Come to me." Sanzang took a step back, sensing the danger in her words. He had no idea what kind of creature stood before him, but something in his soul told him that this was not a being to be trifled with. Wukong's eyes blazed with fury, his grip tightening on his staff. "You won't touch him," he spat, stepping forward to shield the monk. The white bone spirit's smile only grew wider. She tilted her head, her fingers brushing the air like a predator testing the waters. "Ah, the great Sun Wukong," she whispered. "I've heard so much about you. I've been waiting for this moment. How glorious it will be." Without warning, she lunged, faster than the eye could follow. Her skeletal fingers slashed through the air, aiming for Sanzang's heart. But Wukong was ready. His staff collided with her arm, sending a shockwave through the air. The clash of their powers was like the crack of thunder, shaking the very earth beneath their feet. "You will not harm him," Wukong snarled, his voice thick with the power of his rage. The white bone spirit hissed, her eyes burning with an unnatural fire. She pulled back, her form shifting as though it were made of mist, and disappeared into the shadows. A faint laugh echoed from the darkness, mocking them. "This is only the beginning," her voice teased, filled with menace. Wukong's heart raced, his body tense with readiness. He knew the battle wasn't over. The white bone spirit was no ordinary demon. She was powerful, cunning, and able to change her form at will. But he was determined. He would not let her take the monk. The forest around them seemed to grow darker, the trees closing in as if they too were under the spirit's influence. The air was thick with an unsettling pressure, the very atmosphere heavy with dark magic. And then, just as quickly as she had vanished, the white bone spirit reappeared. But this time, she was no longer the same form they had seen. Her features were distorted, monstrous, sharp claws, hollow eyes, and a smile that seemed to stretch impossibly wide. Wukong's staff collided with her again, but she was faster this time, evading his strikes with terrifying grace. Her laugh echoed in his ears, sending a cold shiver down his spine. "You cannot defeat me, Sun Wukong," she taunted, her voice now a harsh, guttural growl. "You may be strong, but you are not invincible. I have waited too long for this." Her form blurred, shifting between one grotesque shape and another, each one more horrifying than the last. She moved with such speed, it was as if she were everywhere and nowhere at once. But Wukong was relentless, his every move calculated, his focus unshakable. He swung his staff with all his might, his attacks faster, more precise. But the white bone spirit was still too elusive, always just out of reach. She struck him once, twice, her claws raking across his skin, and Wukong gritted his teeth against the pain. But he refused to falter. With a roar of fury, he swung his staff one final time, aiming directly at the spirit's heart. This time, there was no evading him. The blow landed with a sickening crack, and the white bone spirit screamed, her form flickering like a candle in the wind. She staggered back, her twisted form beginning to unravel, her body disintegrating into ash. Yet, even as she fell, she managed one last laugh, a sound that sent chills through Wukong's bones. "You may have won this battle, but I will always return," she whispered, her voice fading into the air. As her body crumbled to nothing, the dark presence she had cast over the land began to lift, the weight on their shoulders easing. The forest grew still again, the oppressive silence giving way to the natural sounds of life. But despite the victory, the air still felt heavy. The memory of the white bone spirit's cruel laugh lingered, a reminder that evil was never truly gone. It only waited, biding its time. And somewhere, in the shadows of the world, it watched, waiting for the next opportunity to strike. The heavy mist clung to their clothes, soaking through their robes and armor as they trudged forward. The land before them was eerily quiet, the air thick with a kind of tension, as if the very earth was holding its breath. Tang Sanzang, the monk, walked with purpose, his mind focused solely on the task at hand. Yet, even he could not escape the strange sense of unease that had begun to settle within him. They had heard the whispers, rumors of a kingdom where women ruled and men were either slaves or subjects. But the reality of it was far more unsettling than any story could have prepared them for. They had stumbled upon the land of women. The towering gates loomed before them, decorated with intricate carvings of ancient myths and deities, each one more beautiful than the last. The gates slowly creaked open, revealing a world that felt like a dream or a nightmare. The land was lush, green, and beautiful, but there was something unnatural about it, an overwhelming sense of control, as if every blade of grass, every tree, every breath of wind was orchestrated by an unseen hand. And then they appeared. Women, beautiful and terrifying, surrounded them. Their eyes gleamed with a kind of hunger that made Wukong's spine stiffen. These were no ordinary women, they were fierce warriors, queens, rulers. They moved with purpose, their every step commanding the earth beneath them. But there was something more, the look in their eyes. It wasn't just power, it was something deeper, something ancient, something that seemed to know their every fear, every desire. Sanzang stepped forward, trying to remain calm, trying to hold on to his faith. "We mean no harm," he said, his voice steady, though there was an edge to it that betrayed his nerves. "We seek only the truth, and we are on a sacred mission." The leader of the women, a regal figure clad in gold and silver, stepped forward. Her smile was soft but chilling. "You are welcome here, monk," she said, her voice a melody that seemed to pull at the very strings of his heart. "But know this, all who enter must face the trials of our land. Temptation is our gift and our curse." Wukong's eyes narrowed, his senses on high alert. He had faced many demons in his time, but this felt different. The air was charged, and he could feel something lurking in the depths of his mind, a whisper that threatened to weaken his resolve. The women gathered around them, their gazes fixed on each of the companions. But it was not just their beauty that held them captive, it was the energy they exuded, an allure that was almost impossible to resist. Sanzang, ever the wise and steady monk, felt the pull, but he fought against it. He had trained for years to resist the temptations of the world. He closed his eyes for a moment, focusing on the teachings of his faith, praying for strength. But Wukong, the great Sun Wukong, felt the temptation in a way that was more visceral. His mind raced, his body tense. The women around him were like nothing he had ever seen before, each of them powerful, elegant, and intoxicating in their own way. Their eyes locked with his, and for a moment, he felt his thoughts clouded, his heart pounding in his chest. "Why fight it, great Monkey King?" a woman whispered in his ear, her voice like velvet, wrapping around him. "You face demons, but none as beautiful as we. Why not stay here, with us? We could show you pleasures beyond your wildest dreams." He could feel his resistance weakening, his thoughts slipping, but something inside him, something strong, pushed back. With a growl, he shook off the temptation, his staff appearing in his hands, his grip tightening. "I will not be swayed," he snarled, though his voice was strained, filled with the effort to resist. But the temptation was relentless. The women did not stop. They moved closer, their voices softer, more coaxing, their hands reaching out, brushing against the companions in ways that sent shivers through their bones. Sanzang's heart raced, and for a moment, he feared for his disciples. He could see the battle within them, especially in Wukong, whose face twisted in struggle. The great king, who had fought and conquered so many battles, was now fighting a war within himself, a war against the pull of temptation. The leader of the women stepped forward again, her eyes locking with Sanzang's. "You are strong, monk," she said, her tone a mix of admiration and something darker. "But even the strongest of men will falter. You've seen it in your disciples. Haven't you?" Her words hit him like a physical blow. He looked at Wukong, who was still standing firm, though his eyes flickered with doubt. He looked at Zhu Beiji and Xiao Wujing, both of whom seemed lost in the haze of desire. Even they were struggling. "Stand firm, my disciples," Sanzang whispered, though he was unsure if his words could reach them. "Remember why we are here." The battle within was visible on their faces. The pull was so strong, so overwhelming. Beiji, ever the weak-willed, was the first to stumble. He reached out to one of the women, his face twisted in longing. "Just a moment," he murmured, his voice thick with desire. But before he could take another step, Wukong was there, grabbing him by the collar and pulling him back. "No!" Wukong growled, his eyes burning with fury. "We are not here for this. We have a purpose. Do not forget who we are." Sanzang's heart soared as he saw Wukong's resolve solidify. For a brief moment, the temptations seemed to lose their power. But the battle was far from over. The leader of the women stood watching, her gaze cold, calculating. She knew they would resist, for a time. But it was only a matter of when, not if, they would give in. The kingdom she ruled was built on desire, on temptation. The land itself seemed to hum with the power of it. But the monk and his disciples stood firm. The trials they faced here were not just about strength or power. They were about something deeper. They were about the heart, the soul, the very essence of who they were. And with every step they resisted, they were stronger than the temptations that surrounded them. The thick, cloying air hung heavy as the companions moved deeper into the dark forest. The trees seemed to close in around them, casting long, twisted shadows. Each step was harder than the last, the weight of the forest pressing down on their shoulders. There was no sound, no birds, no rustling of leaves, just an unsettling silence that seemed to swallow everything. Tang Sanzang felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise, the sense that something evil, was lurking nearby. His disciples, though always brave, felt it too. Sun Wukong's usual bravado was gone, his sharp eyes scanning the gloom ahead. Zhu Beiji, ever the skeptic, shifted uneasily on his feet. Xiao Wujing's face was grim, his usually calm demeanor replaced by a rare tension. They all knew something was coming, but none could anticipate just how horrifying it would be. The first sign of danger came with the faintest shimmer in the air, almost imperceptible. It was as if the very forest itself had begun to move. Then, a whisper, soft, seductive, a voice that wrapped around their hearts like a whispering breeze, promising things they couldn't quite name. "Come closer, closer," it cooed, a voice both sweet and chilling. Before they could react, the ground beneath them seemed to pulse. From the darkness of the trees, they appeared, spider demons, their bodies long and twisted, their faces beautiful, almost angelic, but their eyes held nothing but hunger. Their silken webs shimmered in the moonlight, draped between the trees like a trap ready to close in. Beiji was the first to step forward, drawn by the allure of the demons. He felt his pulse quicken, the faint whisperings pulling at his mind. "They're not so bad," he murmured to himself, as if justifying the danger. "They're just women. Beautiful, powerful women." But before he could take another step, a sharp command cut through the fog of desire. "Beiji, stay back!" Wukong shouted, his voice full of urgency. But it was too late. The spider demon closest to Beiji smiled, her lips parting as she extended her arms. Her voice was a soft murmur, yet it had the power to freeze his bones. "Why fight it, my dear? You're already ours, just step closer." Beiji stumbled forward, his eyes glazed over, a foolish grin spreading across his face. It was the spell of their beauty, the promise of pleasure, the offer of an escape from his inner turmoil. But the moment his foot crossed the threshold of their webs, the atmosphere shifted. The ground beneath him seemed to fall away, and he was caught, no longer in a dream, but in a trap. The webs tightened around his legs, pulling him into the sticky threads. His laughter turned to a scream of panic as he struggled, but it was no use. The more he fought, the stronger the web became, wrapping around him with an inescapable grip. "No!" Wukong roared, charging forward with his staff raised, his eyes blazing. The seductive whispers faded into angry hisses as the spider demons sprang into action. In an instant, the forest seemed to come alive with movement, their bodies twisting, their sharp fangs glinting under the pale moon. The battle erupted in a flurry of chaos. Wukong swung his staff with deadly precision, smashing through the webs and striking at the demons who dared to come too close. His movements were swift and sure, but every demon he knocked back only seemed to multiply, appearing from every corner, every shadow, weaving more webs with terrifying speed. Sanzang, standing at the edge of the battle, felt his heart race. His disciples were fighting with all their might, but the spider demons were relentless. Their beauty and power were overwhelming, and for a moment, he feared that his companions would fall, consumed by the webs they were caught in. He could see it in their eyes, the temptation, the pull of the demon's charms. "Stay strong," Sanzang cried, his voice hoarse with desperation. "Remember who you are. We are on a sacred mission. Don't let them take you." Wukong's eyes flickered, his resolve flickering for just a moment. The demon he was facing looked like a vision of the woman he had once loved, her lips painted with the promise of something he couldn't resist. He faltered, just for a heartbeat, but it was enough. The spider demon lunged, sinking her fangs into his arm. His roar of pain echoed through the forest, but his grip on his staff never faltered. He pulled away from the demon's bite, his body rippling with the force of his anger. With a fierce, guttural cry, he spun, swinging his staff with a force that sent the demons flying back into the shadows. But the forest was relentless. The spiders were everywhere now, their webs stretching across the trees, glistening like traps waiting to catch their prey. Beiji was still struggling, trapped in the sticky strands, his movements slow and sluggish from the venom that began to spread through his veins. Sanzang's heart clenched at the sight. His beloved disciples, caught in a web of temptation and danger, with no clear way out. He reached for the sutra, his hands trembling as he began to chant the sacred words, the ancient verses that had once saved them all. His voice was steady despite the fear in his heart. He had to believe, he had to trust, that the power of his faith would be enough to break the spell. For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. The spider demons paused, their eyes narrowing. The web seemed to tremble with the vibration of the sutra, as if resisting the monk's holy words. Then, slowly, the air began to shift. The seductive whispers grew fainter, drowned out by the power of the chant. Beiji's eyes cleared for just a moment, his mind breaking free from the haze. "Master," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Help!" Without hesitation, Wukong charged forward, his staff slamming down with a force that shattered the web around Beiji. He yanked his brother free, pulling him away from the demon's grasp. The spider demons hissed in fury, their movements becoming more frantic as the power of the sutra began to weaken their hold. With one last desperate cry, they scattered, retreating into the dark corners of the forest, leaving the companions battered but alive. But even as the last echoes of the battle faded, the tension in the air remained. They had survived this trial, but the forest, the land of temptation, was far from done with them. The heat was unbearable. It wasn't the kind of warmth that comforted, it was a smoldering, suffocating heat that pressed in on every side, wrapping around the travelers like a furnace. The flaming mountains loomed ahead, their jagged peaks shimmering with a fierce, relentless fire that seemed to burn forever. The sky above was a sickly orange, as if the sun itself had given up on cooling the world below. Every breath felt like inhaling smoke, every step a struggle against the scorching earth beneath their feet. Tang Sanzang's clothes clung to his skin, drenched in sweat. His face was pale, and the heat seemed to sap every ounce of strength from his body. The air felt heavy, like it was pressing down on his chest, making each movement harder than the last. His disciples, too, were visibly struggling. Sun Wukong's usually bright demeanor was gone, his eyes squinting against the sun as he led the way, his fur matted with sweat. Zhu Beiji, ever the one to complain, grumbled under his breath, his face flushed with discomfort. Even the usually steady Xiao Wujing seemed to falter, his gait slower than usual. This was no ordinary mountain range. The flaming mountains were not just a physical obstacle, they were a test of will, a trial that would push even the bravest of hearts to their limits. And in their path lay the only way to continue their journey, the only means of survival, the iron fan, the only thing capable of cooling the raging fire that stood between them and their goal. The thought of the iron fan filled their minds as they pressed forward, though the distance between them and their goal seemed to grow with each agonizing step. There was no way to go around. The mountain pass ahead was blocked by the fierce, unrelenting flames that blazed like a wall of fury. "We can't keep going like this," Beiji muttered, his voice thick with exhaustion. "We'll burn to death if we don't find a way through soon." Sanzang was silent, his mind racing, but there was no easy answer. The Iron Fan could only be found in the hands of Princess Iron Fan, a powerful and elusive figure who lived on the other side of the mountains. But gaining her help wouldn't be simple. The fan had been passed down through generations, and its magic was known to be both rare and potent. Without it, their path would be blocked indefinitely. "Master," Wukong said, his voice hoarse but determined. "We need the fan. We don't have a choice." Sanzang nodded, his heart heavy with the weight of their journey. They had been through so much together, but this was different. This was a test of endurance, a fight against something so much larger than themselves. The flaming mountains were a reminder of the obstacles that still lay ahead. They pressed forward, and as they drew closer to the foot of the mountains, they saw her. Princess Iron Fan, standing alone against the inferno, her presence a striking contrast to the raging flames around her. She was regal and poised, her iron fan held in one hand, her gaze calm and unyielding. The fan gleamed like a weapon of divine power, its potential to stop the flames evident in the way the air around it seemed to shimmer. But there was no warmth in her smile. Her eyes held a quiet sadness, as if she knew that the fan she wielded would never be enough to quell the pain in her own heart. She looked at them, as if already knowing what they had come for. "You've come for the fan," she said, her voice soft, but the weight of it was undeniable. Sanzang stepped forward, his heart pounding. "Please, Princess, we needed to pass through the flaming mountains. Without it, we cannot continue on our journey." Her eyes softened for a brief moment, but the moment was fleeting. She held the fan tightly, as if it were a lifeline she could never let go of. "I know," she replied. "But this fan was not given to me freely. It holds great power, but it also carries a price. The flames you seek to tame, they are not just fire. They are the manifestation of my own grief, my own sorrow. The fan is my only connection to the past, to a time when I was whole." The words hung heavy in the air, like the weight of the mountains themselves. Sanzang felt his heart twist. He had come to ask for help, but in doing so, he had also uncovered a deep, personal pain that he had not anticipated. The fan was not just an object to be used, it was a symbol of a loss that Princess Iron Fan could never escape. Wukong stepped forward, his voice steady despite the tension that filled the air. "We don't want to take it from you. We understand that the fan is more than just a tool. But we have no choice. We need it to survive." The princess's expression hardened, her eyes narrowing as she looked from one face to the next. "You think that the fan will solve all your problems? That it will make the flames go away, just like that?" She snapped her fingers, and the air seemed to crackle with energy. "It's not that simple. You will have to face the cost of this power. The fan will not come without a price." There was a long silence, the weight of her words sinking deep into their hearts. They had all come to rely on the fan, to believe that it would be the solution to their problem. But now they saw the truth, the fan was not a gift, it was a sacrifice. The princess's eyes softened again, the anger giving way to a deep, unspoken sadness. "I cannot bear to see you suffer like this," she said quietly. "I will give you the fan. But understand this, the flames you face are not just the mountains. They are the flames of your own trials. They will burn, they will scar, and you will be tested. But it is through the fire that you will find your way." Sanzang's heart ached as he nodded. He understood, perhaps more than she realized. They had all been tested by fire already. This fan was just another trial they had to face. With a soft sigh, the princess extended the fan to them, her hands trembling slightly. The weight of it was unmistakable, and as Sanzang took it in his hands, he could feel the power pulsing within it, a power that would cool the mountains, but not without consequence. It was the only way forward, the only way to survive. And as they turned to face the mountains once more, the air seemed to shift. The heat still pressed down on them, but now they had the means to fight back. With the iron fan in hand, they would cool the flaming rage of the mountains. But even as the fire began to ebb, a new sense of responsibility weighed heavily on them. The fan had been given with a price, and they all knew that the real challenge was still to come. The air was thick with tension as the group trudged through the dense forest, the weight of their journey pressing down on their shoulders. Their faces were tired, their steps slow, but none of them spoke of turning back. Every obstacle they had faced had only made their resolve stronger. Yet, something about the oppressive silence of the forest felt different this time. It wasn't the quiet of a peaceful wilderness, it was the heavy stillness before a storm, the kind that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, that made your heart race with a fear you couldn't explain. And then, the sound broke through the silence, laughter, high-pitched and cruel, cutting through the stillness like a knife. Sun Wukong's eyes darted toward the sound. His hand instinctively moved to his staff, gripping it tight. "Something's not right," he muttered under his breath. Before anyone could react, the figure appeared. A child. No, not a child. A demon child, his eyes glowing with an unnatural red light, his presence exuding an aura of power that made the very air seem to vibrate. The boy stood before them, his stance cocky and confident, his smile wicked and mischievous. "Who dares to pass through my territory?" The boy's voice rang out, sharp and commanding, carrying a note of authority that belied his youthful appearance. The group paused, and for a moment, the world seemed to freeze. This wasn't an ordinary demon. This was the Red Boy, the son of Princess Iron Fan and the Bull Demon King, a powerful being in his own right. His eyes flashed with a dangerous gleam, and there was no doubt in anyone's mind he was not to be underestimated. Tang Sanzeng took a step forward, his voice steady despite the danger. "We mean no harm. We are travelers seeking the way forward. If you allow us to pass, we will leave in peace." The Red Boy's laughter echoed in the forest again, a sound that sent chills down their spines. "Leave in peace? How foolish. This is my domain, and no one passes without my permission." His eyes narrowed, and suddenly, flames erupted around him, swirling in a terrifying display of power. The heat was unbearable. It wasn't just fire, it was something darker, something that seemed to burn at their very souls. The Red Boy was no ordinary demon, and they could feel it now. The weight of his power was crushing, suffocating. Wukong stepped forward, his usual cocky demeanor gone, replaced with the focused intensity of a warrior who knew the stakes. "You're a demon, and so am I. But I will not let you stop us." The Red Boy's lips curled into a smile, but it was a smile of pure malice. "Then come, monkey. Let me see what you're made of." In an instant, the boy's body transformed. His small, childlike form grew, and his hands turned into massive claws, his mouth opening wide to reveal rows of sharp, jagged teeth. The ground beneath their feet trembled as the Red Boy advanced, his flames licking the air, ready to consume them. Sun Wukong sprang into action, his staff extending with lightning speed. The two locked in a fierce battle, their movements a blur of speed and power. Each blow from Wukong's staff collided with the Red Boy's fiery attacks, sending shockwaves through the forest. The trees around them cracked and splintered, the very earth beneath them shaking. But the Red Boy was quick, too quick. Every time Wukong struck, the boy dodged with ease, his fiery form moving like liquid flame, always one step ahead. Wukong growled in frustration, his eyes narrowing. This was no ordinary opponent. The Red Boy wasn't just a demon, he was a force of nature, a child born from the union of two powerful beings, and he had inherited all of their strength. Zhu Beiji watched with wide eyes, his hand trembling on the hilt of his weapon. "We're going to need more than just a fight to get out of this one." Xiao Wujing's expression was grim. "The Red Boy is powerful, but we have something he doesn't, unity. We cannot defeat him by force alone. We need to work together." Tang Sanzeng stood still, his gaze fixed on the battle unfolding before him. He knew this was a fight unlike any they had faced before. The Red Boy's power was overwhelming, and he could see the toll it was taking on Wukong. But there was something else in the boy's eyes, a deep, underlying sorrow, a pain that perhaps even the Red Boy himself didn't fully understand. As the battle raged on, the Red Boy seemed to grow stronger, his flames more intense, his laughter more manic. He was toying with them, enjoying their struggle. It was then that Tang Sanzeng realized the truth. This wasn't just a fight for survival. This was a battle for the boy's soul. The boy wasn't just an enemy, he was a child lost in his own darkness, a demon torn between his inherited power and a need for something more. It wasn't enough to defeat him in battle, they needed to reach him, to understand the pain that drove him to this point. Sanzeng took a step forward, his voice calm but filled with compassion. "Red Boy, you don't have to do this. You don't have to fight us. You're not just a demon, you're a child, a son. Your parents are out there, and they want you back. Don't let the anger consume you. You don't have to be alone." The boy paused, his flames flickering for just a moment. There was a hesitation in his eyes, a flicker of something human beneath the demon's mask. It was a small moment, but it was enough. Wukong, sensing the shift, pressed forward. "Come on, Red Boy. You don't have to be the monster they made you. You can choose who you want to be." The red boy's eyes flashed with pain, but for a moment, the fire dimmed. The flames that had once blazed with fury now flickered uncertainly, as if the boy was unsure whether to keep fighting or to listen. His fists clenched, and his form wavered, the monstrous claws retreating, his fiery body flickering like a candle in the wind. But before anyone could make a move, the boy's voice cracked, breaking through the tension. "I don't want to be this way," he whispered, so softly that it was almost lost beneath the wind. "But they told me I had to be strong. They said this was the only way." In that moment, it was clear, the red boy wasn't evil. He was a victim of his own circumstances, shaped by the forces around him. The battle they had fought wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a fight for the boy's future, for the chance to save him from the darkness that threatened to consume him. The group paused, waiting for what would come next. The flames flickered one last time, then slowly began to die down, as if the red boy himself was letting go of the fury inside him. The moment they stepped into the darkened cavern, an uneasy chill swept through the air. The ground beneath them was uneven, each step echoing through the silent abyss. The smell of damp stone and forgotten things clung to the walls. But there was something more, something heavier pressing in around them. It was as though the very atmosphere had a pulse, an oppressive force that seemed to breathe with them. They had heard of this place, the trials of greed and deception, where the strongest were brought to their knees, not by force, but by the temptations that lurked just out of sight. Wukong's eyes narrowed, his senses on high alert. He could feel the subtle shift in the air, a change that no one else had noticed yet. "Something's not right," he murmured, his voice low but steady. They had come for the precious artifact that lay hidden in the heart of this place, but what awaited them wasn't just a challenge of strength. No, this trial would ask them something far more dangerous. It would ask them to confront the darkest parts of their own hearts. And none of them, not even the mighty Monkey King, were prepared for the horrors that would unfold. As they walked deeper into the cavern, the first whisper reached them. At first, it was so faint that it might have been mistaken for the wind, but soon, it grew louder, clearer, and unmistakable. "I see what you desire," the voice cooed, honey-sweet and seductive. "I know your hearts, your wants, your deepest cravings. What would you do for the thing you want most? What are you willing to give up?" The words hung in the air like smoke, curling around them, wrapping them in a warmth that was anything but comforting. Wukong's grip on his staff tightened. "Ignore it," he ordered, though the doubt that crept into his voice was hard to hide. "Don't listen to it. It's just a trick." But the whispers continued, each one more personal, more insistent. They probed their minds, dredging up forgotten desires and unspoken fears. Tang Sanzang's face hardened, but even he felt the tug of the voice, the familiar pull of temptation. The artifact, he had to focus on the artifact. But what if it could give him something more? What if it could grant him the power to save more lives, to change the world for the better? The group pressed on, their steps becoming more erratic, more uncertain as the whispers dug into their minds. Each one of them was being tested, pushed to the edge of their own limitations. They had faced countless trials before, but none like this. None that spoke so directly to their weaknesses. Zhu Beiji was the first to falter. His hand shook as he reached for a golden chalice that lay resting in the corner of the cavern, glistening with a warmth that seemed almost alive. His eyes widened in awe. It was beautiful, more beautiful than anything he had ever seen. It was the kind of thing that could make him feel whole, make him feel more than just a foolish pig. His heart pounded in his chest, and for a moment, the world around him seemed to fade away. All he could see was the chalice, all he could hear was the whisper that promised everything he had ever dreamed of. "Take it," the voice urged, more forceful now. "Take it, and all your desires will be fulfilled. You will never want for anything again." Zhu Beiji reached for it, his fingers trembling as they brushed the surface. He could already taste the sweetness of his newfound power, his new life. But just as his hand was about to close around the handle, something sharp pierced his mind, pulling him back to reality. It was Wukong's voice, stern and unyielding. "Don't!" Wukong shouted, rushing forward. "It's not real. It's a trap. But Zhu Beiji had already pulled away, his face flushed with shame. The voice had been so convincing, the temptation so strong. He had almost given in, almost lost everything for the fleeting promise of something he could never truly possess. Focus! Wukong barked. This place is trying to make us betray ourselves. We must resist. As they moved deeper into the cavern, the atmosphere grew heavier. The walls seemed to close in around them, and the air became thick with an unbearable heat. Each step felt like it required more strength than the last. They had to fight, not just the physical challenges of the cavern, but the constant, gnawing temptation that whispered in their ears, promising them everything they had ever wanted, everything they thought they deserved. Tang Sanzang, despite his calm exterior, felt the weight of it all. He had always believed in doing good and helping others, but now the thought crept into his mind, what if he could use the power of the artifact for himself? What if he could reshape the world, cure every ill, end every suffering? The very idea was intoxicating. But just as the thought began to take root, he saw the faces of those he loved, the faces of his disciples, his friends, and the image shattered. Power alone would not make things right. It would only corrupt him. He clenched his fists, shaking off the darkness that threatened to consume him. The cavern was alive with the energy of the trial, each whisper now a shout, each temptation a physical force pulling at their very souls. And then, the final test came. In the center of the cavern, bathed in an unnatural light, lay the artifact they had sought. It was more beautiful than any of them had imagined, a perfect sphere of glowing jade that pulsed with an almost magnetic allure. The Red Boy had warned them. This was the true test. The artifact was not simply an object, it was the culmination of all the greed and deception that had been fed into their hearts. Whoever reached for it would find themselves forever changed. Wukong stepped forward, his eyes locked on the artifact, his heart a war between desire and resolve. He had been through so much, fought countless battles, survived impossible odds, but this was different. This was the one trial that could break him, that could strip away everything he had fought for. But as his hand reached out, something inside him snapped. He recoiled, the weight of the decision crushing him. It wasn't worth it. No treasure, no power, was worth the loss of who he was. And just like that, the whispers stopped. The suffocating weight of temptation lifted. They stood together, battered but whole, as the cavern around them began to shift. The trials were over. But what had they learned? What had they lost? The ground beneath their feet trembled as they approached the entrance to the Cave of Seven Treasures, a gaping maw in the side of the mountain that seemed to swallow the light itself. The air around them was thick with the scent of damp stone and the unmistakable feeling of danger. Wukong's heart raced, his fingers tightening around his staff, as the cave loomed before them, a dark promise of the trials to come. "It's here," Tang Sanzang murmured, his voice a mixture of awe and apprehension. "The scriptures we seek are inside, but so are the demons who guard them." The path ahead seemed almost too quiet, too still. But they knew better than to trust silence in places like this. Every instinct screamed that something was wrong. It wasn't just the cave's foreboding presence, it was the feeling that something was waiting for them, something ancient and powerful, ready to strike. They stepped cautiously inside, the sound of their footsteps echoing off the walls, bouncing back to them like whispers. The deeper they went, the darker it became, until even Wukong's sharp eyes could barely make out the faint outline of the path. Suddenly, a low growl rumbled from the shadows. A chill ran down their spines as something moved, something large and unseen, shifting in the dark. The demons were here, and they were watching. Tang Sanzang's breath quickened, his heart pounding in his chest. "Stay close," he ordered, though even he couldn't fully mask the fear in his voice. The cave itself seemed to shift with the sound of their every movement. A crackling, electric energy filled the air, thick with the presence of the unknown. Every corner seemed to hold a new horror, every turn a new challenge. The walls closed in as they pressed forward, the only light coming from the flickering glow of Wukong's golden eyes, which pierced the dark with their determination. It wasn't long before the first of the demons revealed itself. It was a creature of twisted shadows, its eyes glowing an eerie red as it emerged from the darkness, its claws scraping against the rock. The air grew heavy as it stepped into the light, revealing its monstrous form. It was like nothing they had ever seen, a grotesque combination of human and beast, its body covered in scales, its mouth dripping with venomous fangs. Zhu Beiji cursed under his breath, his hand instinctively going to the hilt of his weapon. "I should have known," he muttered. "Demons never play fair." But it wasn't just the monsters they had to contend with, it was the very cave itself, which seemed to shift around them, closing in with each step they took. The wall seemed alive, the very stone groaning under the pressure, as if the cave was trying to swallow them whole. "Don't let it get to you," Wukong warned, his voice sharp and commanding. "Focus on the task. We can't let fear control us now." But as they pressed forward, the demons multiplied, each more grotesque than the last. They came in waves, crawling from the cracks in the walls, from the dark recesses where even the light dared not touch. And yet, no matter how many they fought off, more seemed to appear from the shadows, relentless in their pursuit. They fought with everything they had, fists, claws, magic, doing whatever they could to keep the demons at bay. But it was clear they were only one step ahead of the abyss, and the treasure they sought was still just out of reach. Every battle, every blow struck, felt like it was costing them a part of themselves. The further they went into the cave, the more oppressive it became, until it felt as though they were fighting not just the demons, but the very air itself. Then, just when they thought they couldn't go any further, they saw it, glowing faintly in the distance, the object they had come for. The 7 treasures, a set of sacred scriptures, lay in the heart of the cave, resting on a pedestal made of bones. But it wasn't just the scriptures that drew their attention. The pedestal was surrounded by an aura of pure darkness, an impenetrable barrier that seemed to pulse with each beat of their hearts. The demons had stopped for a moment, as though waiting, watching. Wukong's eyes narrowed, sensing the trap. "It's too easy," he muttered. "This is what they want. To lure us in." But they had no choice. The scriptures were too important. They could not turn back. Not now. Tang Sanzang stepped forward, his voice unwavering. "Stay alert. We're almost there." With a final push, they reached the pedestal, and the moment they did, the demons attacked with a ferocity that left them barely time to react. They fought with everything they had, but the battle seemed endless. For each demon they took down, another appeared, as though the cave itself was feeding on their strength, using the darkness to overwhelm them. Zhu Beiji swung his rake, his usual bravado gone, replaced by a desperation to survive. "I can't take much more of this," he grunted, sweat beading on his forehead. "They just keep coming." Wukong stood tall, his staff flashing as he fought with a skill and precision that seemed impossible in such chaos. "Stay focused. We must get the scriptures." The demons snarled, their voices like a chorus of death, their eyes gleaming with malice. The cave seemed to pulse with their energy, growing darker, hotter, and more oppressive with each passing moment. The air was thick with the weight of their fear, the fear that this battle might be the last. Just when it seemed that they might be overrun, Tang Sanzang made a move. He reached out, his hand steady despite the chaos, and touched the pedestal. The moment his fingers made contact, a surge of energy exploded from the pedestal, pushing the demons back and lighting the cave with a blinding light. But the light didn't just repel the demons, it seemed to burn through the darkness that had wrapped around them, purging the cave of its evil influence. The demons screamed in pain as they were forced to retreat into the shadows from which they had emerged. And then, it was over. The cave was silent, the demons gone, and the scriptures lay before them, untouched. But despite their victory, there was no celebration, no sense of triumph. Instead, there was only exhaustion and the haunting realization that they had narrowly escaped something far darker than any of them had truly understood. With the scriptures in hand, they turned to leave, but the cave had already begun to shift again. The path ahead was clear, for now. But they knew that every victory in this cursed place came at a price. And though they had survived, the scars of what they had faced would stay with them forever. The weight of the scrolls in Tang Sanzang's hands felt heavier than ever before. As he slowly unrolled the first of the sacred scriptures, a coldness swept over him, a sense of wrongness that sank deep into his chest. The words were unfamiliar, their characters twisted and distorted, as if the ancient knowledge they were meant to hold had been deliberately corrupted. His hands trembled as he tried to make sense of the pages, but with each turn, it became clearer. This was not what they had fought for, not what they had risked everything to obtain. "Something's wrong," he whispered, his voice barely audible in the stillness of the cave. His eyes darted over the pages again, hoping to find the truth hidden beneath the twisted characters, but there was no denying it now. The scriptures they had fought so hard to retrieve, the very scriptures that had been the key to their mission, were nothing more than fakes. A cruel trick, a mockery of the knowledge they had sought for so long. Wukong stood beside him, his face unreadable, his golden eyes flashing with a dangerous intensity. "This can't be," he growled, his voice low and filled with disbelief. He took the scrolls from Tang Sanzang's hands and examined them himself, his eyes narrowing as he, too, realized the grim truth. "These are not the scriptures." Zhu Beiji's snort echoed through the silence of the cave. "Of course they aren't. It was too easy," he muttered bitterly, pacing in frustration. "All that bloodshed, all that danger for nothing." The air around them grew heavy, as if the very cave itself mourned the betrayal. Tang Sanzang collapsed to his knees, his heart sinking with the weight of failure. How could they have been so blind? How had they not seen the signs earlier, the small whispers of doubt that had been drowned out by their desperation? He had believed in the mission, believed in the righteousness of their cause. But now, faced with the truth, he was unsure if any of it had been worth it. "We have to go back," Wukong said, his voice sharp, slicing through the despair. "We made a mistake, and now we have to fix it." Tang Sanzang nodded, though the thought of returning to the place they had just escaped, where the demons still lurked in the shadows, made his stomach churn. But he knew Wukong was right. They couldn't leave this mistake uncorrected. The scriptures were too important, too precious to be discarded so carelessly. They had to be restored to their rightful place. With a heavy heart and no words left to speak, they turned back toward the cave's depths, each step feeling like a walk through the valley of failure. The darkness seemed even thicker now, pressing in on them from all sides. The demons had already retreated, but there was a feeling in the air that made it seem as though they were only waiting for the right moment to strike again. Every shadow, every flicker of movement, made their hearts race. As they retraced their steps, the weight of their mistake became unbearable. Tang Sanzang kept his head low, unable to look anyone in the eye. They had come so far, endured so much, only to be deceived in the end. What would the others think when they found out? What would the world think of them, the ones who had failed to fulfill their sacred duty? "I should have known," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I should have seen it. It's my fault. I let us fall into this trap." Wukong's hand on his shoulder was firm, comforting. "It's not your fault," he said, his voice steady. "You did what you had to. We all did. Now, we make it right." But the reassurance did little to calm the storm inside Tang Sanzang's heart. The weight of their mistake was a burden that would stay with them forever, a shadow that would follow them wherever they went. And as they reached the cave's entrance once more, the path leading to the false scriptures ahead, the sense of dread that had clung to them now felt like a crushing weight. They had returned to the place of their greatest failure, and yet, there was no other choice but to face it. There would be no redemption until they did. As they approached the pedestal where the false scriptures rested, a sense of urgency filled the air, each of them knowing that time was running out. The demons were sure to return, drawn to the deceit like moths to a flame. They had no choice but to act fast, to correct the mistake before it was too late. But as Tang Sanzang stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the fake scriptures, a voice echoed through the cave, a voice that had never belonged to any of them. It was a low, mocking laugh, the sound of something, or someone, celebrating their failure. "You think you can just take what's rightfully mine," the voice hissed, sending a chill through the group. The air seemed to freeze around them, and from the shadows emerged a figure, cloaked in dark robes, its eyes gleaming with malice. The demon that had tricked them, that had set this trap in motion, was revealed at last. Tang Sanzang's breath caught in his throat, his mind racing for a way to fight back. But there was no time to think, no time to plan. They had made their mistake, and now they had to face the consequences. Wukong raised his staff, his golden eyes flashing with determination. "You won't get away with this," he snarled, his voice a promise of retribution. The demon's laughter echoed through the cave once more, a sound that made the ground tremble beneath their feet. "You're too late," it taunted. "The damage is done. The false scriptures are mine to control now." The words stung like poison, but Tang Sanzang refused to let despair consume him. They would fix this, no matter the cost. He had to believe that. The truth was still out there, hidden beneath the lies. They just had to reach it. The heat hit them before they even saw it. A wall of suffocating warmth, like stepping into an oven, immediately made them feel like their skin was burning. The air shimmered with intensity, thick with the unbearable promise of flames. Tang Sanzang wiped the sweat from his brow, his heart pounding in his chest as he stared at the river before him. It wasn't just any river, it was the river of fire, a stream of molten lava that seemed to pulse with life, as though the very river itself was a living creature, waiting to devour anyone who dared to cross. The sight of the river sent a chill through Wukong. He stepped forward, his usual bravado faltering for just a moment. This is different," he murmured, his voice low. His eyes scanned the horizon, looking for some sign of a way across, but there was nothing. Just the fierce, unrelenting river of fire, stretching endlessly in both directions. Zhu Beiji stood next to him, scratching his head. "How are we supposed to get across this?" His voice was filled with disbelief, but beneath that, there was a tinge of fear. It was rare for him to show such weakness, but even he couldn't deny the gravity of their situation. The river of fire wasn't a challenge to be taken lightly. But Tang Sanzang, despite his fear, stood tall. His eyes were fixed on the river, unwavering. He had seen countless challenges, each one more dangerous than the last, but this was different. This wasn't just a test of strength or skill. This was a test of willpower, of the soul. The river wasn't just an obstacle, it was a force that seemed to embody the very essence of torment and suffering. "It's not about crossing the river," Tang Sanzang said, his voice steady, though his heart was racing. "It's about surviving it." The group fell silent as they processed his words. The idea of crossing was terrifying, but the thought of surviving the river, of enduring the agony that would surely come with each step, was almost too much to bear. The river's fiery surface bubbled and hissed, as though mocking their hesitation. The heat radiating from it burned their lungs, making it hard to breathe, but still, they stood at the edge, unwilling to back down. "We'll have to make it across, no matter what," Wukong finally said, his voice firm. His golden eyes were filled with a mixture of determination and something else, a quiet understanding that there was no turning back. But even as they steeled themselves for what was to come, doubts lingered. The flames seemed to reach out toward them, licking the air hungrily, eager to consume whatever dared to approach. Every instinct screamed at them to turn back, to find another way, but there was no other way. The path forward was clear, and it led directly through the river of fire. With a deep breath, Tang Sanzang stepped forward, his first footfall on the riverbank sending a tremor through his body. The ground beneath him was hot, the heat radiating upward like a furnace. Sweat stung his eyes as he forced himself to take another step. The closer they got to the river's edge, the more intense the heat became, suffocating, stifling. His heart was in his throat, and yet, he couldn't stop moving. They had come too far to turn back now. Wukong moved beside him, his golden staff gripped tightly in his hand, ready for whatever might come next. The fear was still there, but now it was tempered with a cold resolve. He wouldn't let this river claim them. Not today. Zhu Beiji followed closely behind, his steps unsteady but determined, his usual sense of humor replaced by an unspoken understanding of the danger they faced. As they approached the river, the heat became unbearable, a scorching wave that seemed to burn them from every direction. The flames churned, rising higher and higher, as if testing their resolve. Each step felt like they were walking through an inferno, the flames licking at their clothes, their skin. Tang Sanzang could feel the heat through his robes, through every fiber of his being. The pain was sharp, but it wasn't just physical, it was the kind of pain that reached into the soul, threatening to consume them from within. The air was thick with the smell of burning flesh, a reminder of the risk they were taking. Their legs shook with every step, but they pressed on, inch by inch, their eyes locked on the far side of the river, the only thing that mattered in that moment. The closer they got to the river's edge, the more impossible it seemed to cross. The fire was everywhere now, filling their vision, blinding them to all else. "Keep moving," Tang Sanzang urged, his voice barely audible above the roar of the flames. "We can do this. We have to." With each step, the flames grew stronger, hotter, more desperate to claim them. The heat seared their skin, made their limbs feel like they were made of lead. Zhu Beiji stumbled, his feet faltering as the unbearable heat threatened to overwhelm him, but Wukong was there, steadying him with a firm grip. "You've got this," Wukong whispered, his voice steady, but his eyes dark with the knowledge that every second brought them closer to being consumed by the fire. The heat pressed against them from all sides now, the flames rising higher, their tongues of fire licking at their faces, their hands. The fire seemed to mock them, daring them to continue. It was as though the river itself was a living entity, its fiery waves rising up to devour them. Tang Sanzang could feel his heart pounding in his chest, the fear threatening to take over, but he refused to let it. The pain, the heat, it was nothing compared to the lives they had already sacrificed to get this far. He couldn't let it end here. With one final push, they reached the other side. The river's inferno had been replaced by an eerie calm, the heat receding as they took their first breaths of air that didn't burn their lungs. The flames still raged behind them, but they had made it. They had crossed the river of fire. But even as they stood there, panting and burned, a strange quiet settled over them. The journey wasn't over, not by a long shot. The fire had tested their endurance, their resolve, but it was only one of many trials they would face. As they stood at the river's edge, the path ahead seemed even darker, more uncertain. The fire was just the beginning, and the true battle still lay ahead. The air was thick with tension, thick enough to feel it on your skin. Tang Sanzang stood at the entrance of the test, his mind already whirling with what was to come. His heart hammered in his chest. Every step forward felt heavier than the last, a weight that pressed down on his very soul. He had faced trials before, seen death and destruction, had witnessed the fury of gods and demons alike, but this was something else entirely. This wasn't a battle of strength or even wit. It was a test of something deeper, something far more personal. His very character would be under scrutiny. He glanced to his side, where Wukong stood silently, his golden eyes reflecting the same storm of thoughts. Wukong had been with him through thick and thin. They had battled demons, crossed treacherous lands, faced death itself. But now, even Wukong, proud and unyielding as he was still. The silence between them was heavy, unspoken fears lingering in the air. The test that awaited them would require more than physical strength. It would require the purity of heart, the strength of virtue. As the ground beneath them shifted, the path ahead blurred into a haze of bright light, so sudden it stung their eyes. The very air seemed to hum with an energy that sent a chill down their spines. Then, from within the haze, a figure emerged, a radiant being, glowing with an aura so intense it seemed to burn the very earth beneath it. Her presence was both gentle and commanding, a calm yet powerful force. "You have come, Tang Sanzang," the figure said, her voice soft but filled with authority. "You seek to pass this test, to prove your worth. But know this, the true test is not of your strength, nor of your cleverness. It is of your heart. You must face your own soul, for it is that which will guide you through the darkness ahead." Tang Sanzang's heart skipped a beat. A test of the soul. He had never been afraid of enemies, he had faced demons, gods, and monsters without hesitation. But to be tested on what lay within, that was something else entirely. Without a word, the figure raised her hand, and the air around them seemed to ripple. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and in the blink of an eye, Tang Sanzang was no longer standing on solid earth. Instead, he found himself alone in a vast, empty space, surrounded by nothing but the cold, unfeeling darkness. His mind raced, panic starting to set in. He couldn't see Wukong, couldn't hear anything but the erratic beat of his own heart. This isolation was its own kind of torment. "Where is Wukong?" Tang Sanzang whispered to himself, his voice barely escaping into the vast emptiness. There was no answer. Suddenly, the darkness parted. Before him stood an image, a figure so familiar it stopped his breath. It was his mother, standing in front of him, smiling as if nothing had changed. But something was wrong. Her eyes, though filled with warmth, seemed distant. Her smile was too perfect, too serene. His heart squeezed with longing and confusion. "You've come so far, my son," the figure said, her voice echoing softly, like a memory he had long buried. "But what will you do when the truth is laid before you? What is your true heart, Tang Sanzang?" He stood frozen, unable to respond. It was as though he was caught in a moment from his past, a moment he thought he had left behind. A moment that forced him to face everything he had tried to forget, the pain, the guilt, the unanswered questions. The figure stepped forward, her hands outstretched as if she wished to embrace him. But Tang Sanzang felt his resolve shaking. "No, you're not real." The words barely left his lips, but the moment they did, his mother's smile faltered. Her eyes, once filled with light, darkened. The warmth vanished, replaced by a cold, almost accusing stare. "Are you sure?" And just like that, the world around him began to distort, the image of his mother twisting into something darker, something more haunting. The figure in front of him was still his mother's shape, but the warmth was gone, replaced by an overwhelming sorrow that suffocated him. "You cannot escape yourself," the figure said, her voice now hollow, sorrowful. "You will always carry what you refuse to face. Always." His legs weakened, his body trembling. He couldn't breathe. The weight of the truth crashed down on him, guilt, shame, regrets, all the moments he had failed those he loved, all the choices he had made that led him to this point. His vision blurred with tears, but the image of his mother remained, pulling him back into the sorrow he had tried to bury for so long. In the distance, Wukong's voice broke through the darkness, sharp and firm, filled with a quiet strength. "You have to face it, Tang Sanzang. You can't run anymore. You're stronger than this." The voice, steady and sure, was a lifeline. Tang Sanzang's head snapped up, his breath catching in his throat. Wukong was here, with him, as he had always been. The dark vision of his mother still lingered, but now it felt less oppressive. He could hear Wukong's voice, a grounding force, calling him back. "You can do this," Wukong continued. "You've faced the worst of the world. But now, you have to face the most important thing, yourself." Tang Sanzang's hands clenched into fists as he struggled to control his breathing. The figure of his mother began to flicker, fading in and out of existence. With every moment, her presence grew weaker, less solid. "I am not afraid," he said, his voice hoarse but growing in strength. "I will face the truth." The darkness around him began to recede, the heavy weight lifting as he took a step forward, then another, until the image of his mother was gone entirely. The empty void began to shift, the soft light returning, casting a glow that warmed his skin. He could hear Wukong's voice clearly now, calling his name. "You did it, Tang Sanzang." And in that moment, a sense of calm washed over him. The darkness had not defeated him. His own heart, his own fears, had been the true test. It had been a test of virtue, of finding the strength to face his flaws, his regrets, and to rise above them. For the first time in what felt like forever, he allowed himself to breathe, to simply exist in that stillness. There were no grand words, no triumphant cheers. Just a quiet, steady presence beside him. Wukong, ever loyal, standing as a reminder that he was never truly alone. Together, they had faced a test of character. Together, they had conquered it. But ahead of them lay more challenges. The true test was not yet over, and there was still much to do. The path was long, But for now, in this moment, they had won a battle not of the body, but of the soul. The ground trembled beneath their feet as Sun Wukong stood before the looming figure of the great demon king of the West. It felt like the air itself had become thick with a heavy, suffocating tension, and the sky above seemed to darken in response. The last test, the final battle, had arrived. It wasn't just a fight for victory or honor, it was the culmination of everything they had worked for, everything they had sacrificed. This was the moment where everything could change forever. Wukong's heart pounded in his chest as his eyes locked on the great demon king. His immense form towered over Wukong, a being forged from shadows and darkness. The demon king's fiery eyes glowed with a malice so deep that it seemed to burn the very air between them. His smile was cruel, full of arrogance and pride, the kind that comes from knowing no one had ever been able to defeat him. But Sun Wukong was not afraid. He had faced countless enemies, fought through storms of fire, and battled monsters beyond imagination. But this was different. The stakes were higher. The path they had walked had led them here, and now he couldn't afford to fail. Not for himself, not for Tang Sanzang, not for everything they had endured to reach this moment. With a powerful roar, the Demon King lunged forward, his enormous claws slicing through the air, aimed straight at Wukong's chest. The force behind the strike was enough to split the earth in two, yet Wukong moved with a speed that was almost impossible to follow. His body twisted in the air, narrowly avoiding the attack. A blur of gold, he darted in close, his staff, ever present, ever steady, whipping forward like lightning. But the Demon King wasn't caught off guard. With a growl, he swung his massive hand down, slamming Wukong back onto the ground with the force of a thunderstrike. The impact shook the world around them, and the air went silent for a heartbeat. Wukong's vision swam as he rose, the weight of the battle pressing down on him. His body ached, his every muscle screaming in protest. But he couldn't stop now. He would not stop. The world around him blurred as he gathered his strength, focusing on the task at hand. This wasn't just about winning, it was about proving that the darkness the Demon King represented could be defeated. That it would be defeated. As the Demon King advanced, his claws glowing with dark power, Wukong's mind raced. He needed to do something different. Something that would tip the scales in his favor. The Demon King's strength was immense, but Wukong had something else, something that could break through the darkness. His heart, his spirit, his unbreakable will. With a roar of his own, Wukong surged forward, his staff gleaming in the dim light. The battle raged around them, the clash of powers shaking the earth to its core. Wukong was relentless, a blur of motion, his strikes sharp and precise, his movements fluid. Yet the Demon King matched him blow for blow, his power seemingly endless. Every strike from the Demon King felt like it could shatter mountains, but Wukong's resolve never wavered. He refused to back down, refused to let fear take root in his heart. He had faced impossible odds before, and he would face them again. But the Demon King was cunning. With a roar, he summoned the dark powers that had once destroyed entire worlds. Black tendrils of energy shot from his hands, wrapping around Wukong, constricting like the jaws of a great beast. Wukong gasped as the energy squeezed the breath from his lungs, his body screaming in agony. The world around him seemed to close in, the darkness suffocating him. And yet, in that moment of darkness, a spark of light remained within him. The teachings of Tang Sanzang, the strength of his friends, the belief in something greater than himself. Wukong's hand tightened around his staff, his resolve hardening. The power of the Demon King could not break him. It would never break him. With a furious cry, Wukong broke free of the tendrils, his golden fur glinting as he sprang forward. The Demon King's eyes widened in surprise as Wukong's staff slammed into him with all the force of a thunderbolt. The sound of the impact was deafening, like a great bell tolling the end of an era. The Demon King staggered back, his power faltering for the first time in centuries. But the battle was far from over. The Demon King roared in fury, his dark magic swirling around him as he gathered his strength for one final attack. The earth cracked and trembled beneath them, the sky above swirling with dark clouds. The world itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would come next. Wukong's eyes narrowed. This was it. This was the moment. He could feel the power surging within him, the strength of every battle he had fought, the fire of his spirit. He had been forged in adversity, tempered by hardship. The Demon King had underestimated him, thinking that his darkness could consume all. But Wukong had the light of his heart to guide him. He had the strength of his soul. With a mighty cry, Wukong swung his staff, the golden weapon glowing with power. It collided with the Demon King's dark form, and in that moment, it felt as though the very heavens themselves were shaking. The Demon King's scream echoed through the land as his dark energy shattered, his form crumbling to dust in the wind. The ground fell silent, the storm of battle finally coming to an end. Wukong stood amidst the wreckage, his breath ragged, his body bruised and battered. But he was standing. He had won. And the darkness, at least for now, had been defeated. As the dust settled and the sky cleared, the first rays of light touched the earth. Wukong stood alone, but he was not truly alone. In his heart, the memory of every step he had taken, every trial he had faced, and every person who had stood by his side filled him with warmth. The battle was over. But there was still much to be done. The world was waiting for them, and the trials were far from finished. But in that moment, as the light bathed the land, Wukong knew that he was ready for whatever came next. The gates of the Thunderclap Monastery loomed ahead, their massive wooden doors carved with ancient symbols. The air was thick with the sound of chanting, a low hum that resonated with something deep within. Tang Sanzang's heart raced as he approached, the weight of his mission pressing down on him. He had come so far, through trials that tested his body, his mind, and his spirit. And now, the final moment was upon him. He stepped into the courtyard, his footsteps echoing in the stillness. The monastery, ancient and serene, seemed to pulse with a quiet power. In the distance, he could see a figure sitting under a massive tree, surrounded by a golden light that seemed to touch every corner of the land. It was Buddha. Tang Sanzang's heart skipped a beat. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the meeting with the one who could finally grant him the true scriptures. But as he approached, the air grew heavier, and the ground beneath his feet seemed to shift. It was as if the very earth was alive, watching him, waiting. He felt a presence that was beyond anything he had ever known, a stillness that seemed to fill the entire world. Buddha sat calmly under the tree, his eyes closed, a serene smile on his face. His robes shimmered with a light that was almost too bright to look at, and yet, Tang Sanzang could not tear his gaze away. It wasn't just the Buddha's presence that was overwhelming, it was the peace that radiated from him. In that moment, Tang Sanzang felt a deep sense of calm settle within his chest, as if all the doubts, fears, and worries he had carried for so long had been washed away in a single breath. "Welcome, Tang Sanzang," Buddha's voice echoed, soft yet powerful, like the sound of a distant bell. "You have traveled far, and your heart has been tested. But your journey is not yet complete." Tang Sanzang's throat tightened. He had heard the stories, the tales of those who had faced Buddha and received his wisdom. He had always thought of it as something distant, something unattainable. And yet, here he was, standing before the one who held the answers to all the questions he had carried in his heart. Buddha's eyes opened slowly, and in that moment, Tang Sanzang felt as though the world had shifted. The golden light around him seemed to grow brighter, warmer. It was as if Buddha's very gaze was a balm, soothing the deep ache in Tang Sanzang's soul. The weight of his quest, the pain of his losses, all of it seemed to lift, leaving him feeling lighter than he ever had before. "You have suffered," Buddha said, his voice filled with an ancient compassion. "But your suffering has brought you here, to this moment. The true scriptures are not just words on a page. They are the path to enlightenment. And you, Tang Sanzang, are ready to receive them." Tang Sanzang's heart thudded in his chest. He had heard of the scriptures, of course. They were the key to everything, the teachings that would guide him and his companions on the final leg of their journey. But he had never imagined that this moment would feel so overwhelming. The weight of the scriptures, the responsibility of carrying them, it was almost too much to bear. Yet in Buddha's presence, the burden seemed to fade into nothingness. With a gentle gesture, Buddha raised his hand, and a golden scroll appeared before Tang Sanzang. It shimmered with an ethereal glow, as though the very air around it had taken on a life of its own. As Tang Sanzang reached out to take it, he felt the power within it, the energy that had been imbued in every letter, every word. This was not just a text, it was a living, breathing testament to the divine. The moment his fingers touched the scroll, a rush of warmth flooded through him. He could feel the wisdom of countless generations flowing into him, the knowledge of the ages filling the empty spaces within his mind. It was overwhelming and beautiful, a flood of light that seemed to fill every corner of his being. He gasped, his eyes wide, as the scriptures revealed themselves to him, not in words, but in a deeper, more profound understanding. For a long moment, there was only silence. Buddha watched him with the same serene smile, his eyes filled with a quiet knowing. The scroll in Tang Sanzang's hands began to glow even brighter, its light spreading outward, enveloping them both in a soft, golden radiance. Tang Sanzang's chest tightened, his heart beating faster as he felt the weight of the scriptures settle within him. It was as though the world around him had vanished, leaving only this sacred exchange, this moment of profound connection. The warmth of the light seemed to penetrate every part of him, melting away the last of his doubts. The journey had not just been about reaching this moment, it had been about the transformation that had taken place within him along the way. The trials, the struggles, the sacrifices, they had all led him to this point. And now, with the true scriptures in his hands, he was ready to continue. He was ready to lead, to share this wisdom with the world. Buddha spoke again, his voice a soft, steady pulse in the air. "You have learned much, Tang Sanzang. But remember, wisdom is not a burden to be carried alone. It is a light that must be shared with others, a flame that must be passed from hand to hand. Do not let the scriptures remain hidden within you. Let them guide you, let them guide all who seek the truth." Tang Sanzang nodded, his heart swelling with gratitude. He had always known that his path was not just his own, that the journey he had undertaken was not just for himself, but for all those who had yet to find their way. The scriptures were not a gift just for him, they were a gift for the world. And now, with them in his hands, he could share that gift with others. The golden light around them began to fade, the warmth of Buddha's presence lingering in the air. Tang Sanzang felt a deep peace settle in his chest, as if he had been blessed by something greater than himself. The world felt different now, lighter, more alive. The scriptures were not just words on a scroll, they were a living testament to everything that was good and true in the world. And with that, Tang Sanzang knew that the next part of his journey had already begun. Sun Wukong stood before the assembly, the weight of centuries pressing down on him. His golden fur, once vibrant and untamed, now shimmered with a quiet radiance, like the first light of dawn breaking through a dark sky. The great Monkey King had fought battles, defied gods, and shattered chains, but now, in this moment, there was no fight left in him. Only the heavy truth of what he had become. The air felt charged, as though the entire world was holding its breath. Tang Sanzang, his beloved master, stood by his side, his eyes filled with quiet pride. Sun Wukong had once been a force of nature, a wild, untamable spirit, but now, something within him had shifted. A change had taken root, deep within his very soul. The Buddha's presence was heavy, and as the great sage spoke, every word felt like a strike to Sun Wukong's heart. "You have fought long and hard, Sun Wukong. You have learned much, suffered much. But what you have yet to learn is what lies beyond the anger, beyond the pride. The world you once knew, where power was your only truth, is no longer yours to command. What will you do, now that you stand at the edge of your own transformation?" Sun Wukong's mind raced. His past seemed so distant now, a life he had lived but no longer recognized. The fire that once burned within him, the fire of rebellion, defiance, and strength, had turned to ash. He had sought power, glory, and freedom. But here, before Buddha, he realized that none of those things held meaning anymore. Not in the way he had thought. His chest tightened as the weight of his own arrogance pressed down on him. It had been a long road, filled with lessons that had scarred him, humbled him, and ultimately brought him to this moment. He had never imagined that this path, which had begun as a pursuit of personal gain, would lead him here. To this moment of surrender. To the moment where his greatest strength had become his greatest weakness. His pride. His need for control. These were the very chains that had bound him, and now, with them slipping away, he was left exposed. The Buddha's voice, soft and gentle, reached his ears again. True power, Wukong, is not found in strength alone. It is found in humility, in compassion, and in understanding. The greatest transformation you will ever experience is not in the battlefields you've fought on, but in the quiet peace you find within yourself. It was then, in the stillness of that moment, that Sun Wukong understood. The chains that had once bound him were not made of metal or stone, they were made of his own desires. His own ego. And in this moment, he had a choice. To continue clinging to the remnants of his past, or to let go and embrace what was before him. He had always thought of himself as the strongest. The greatest warrior. No one had ever bested him, not even the gods. But in the presence of the Buddha, he felt small. He felt the weight of all his arrogance, all the years he had spent chasing after empty glory. And in that weight, he felt the stirrings of something else, something that had always been there, but had never been given the chance to grow. Sun Wukong's heart began to soften. The bitterness he had carried for so long began to melt away, replaced by something he had never known. A quiet peace. A sense of clarity. His breath came slower, steadier, as though the very rhythm of his being had changed. The fire that had once burned so fiercely within him now flickered, gentle and warm, a light that no longer sought to burn the world, but to illuminate it. Tang Sanzang stepped forward, his eyes filled with compassion. You have done more than you know, Wukong. You have shown us all the true meaning of redemption. The power of transformation lies not in the battles we win, but in the battles we overcome within ourselves. Sun Wukong looked at his master, his heart swelling with an emotion he could not name. There was no anger in his chest now, no pride. Just a deep, humbling gratitude. He had fought for so long, had given so much of himself to the pursuit of power, but it was only in surrendering that power that he had found true freedom. A golden light began to fill the air around him, and Sun Wukong felt the change begin to take form. His body seemed to glow with the warmth of 1,000 suns, but it was not a destructive fire. It was a light that embraced him, washed over him, and changed him from the inside out. His fur shimmered as though every strand had been woven with divine light, his form growing taller, his features more serene. The wild, untamable spirit that had once defined him had been replaced by a calm, unwavering peace. And with that peace came the realization that he was not the same. He could never be the same again. He fell to his knees, overwhelmed by the sheer weight of the transformation. It was not just his appearance that had changed. It was his very being. His soul had been remade, reshaped into something new. Something pure. Something whole. His once unruly heart, full of rage and rebellion, was now filled with compassion. The Buddha had shown him the way, but it was his own willingness to let go of his past, to release his anger, that had allowed him to truly become something greater. Sun Wukong was no longer the Monkey King who had defied the heavens. He was something more, something beyond what he had ever imagined himself capable of being. His transformation was not just physical. It was spiritual. His mind, his heart, his very essence had been reborn. The golden light faded, and in its place, Sun Wukong stood as a figure of peace, a true Buddha. His once proud posture had softened, but it carried with it a strength of a different kind, the strength of wisdom, of understanding, of love. The fire that had once consumed him was now a guiding light, not a force of destruction, but a force of creation, healing, and hope. As he looked up, his eyes met those of Tang Sanzang, who smiled with pride. And in that smile, Sun Wukong saw something he had never seen before: acceptance. Not just from his master, but from himself. He had finally found the peace he had sought for so long. The reward of enlightenment had not come in the form of power, but in the form of the quiet, unshakable peace that now filled his heart. The wind whispered through the trees, a familiar sound, but one that seemed almost foreign to Sun Wukong now. His feet touched the soft earth of the mountain of flowers and fruit for the first time in what felt like an eternity. It was a place of memories, memories of his past, of the pride and arrogance that had once defined him. But as he stood there now, the familiar scent of flowers in the air and the rustling leaves around him, he realized that this was no longer the place he had left. He was not the same. And this mountain, too, had changed. The Monkey King had returned, not as the fiery, rebellious creature who had once defied the heavens, but as a hero, a being of peace and wisdom. His journey had been long, filled with trials and pain, but it had brought him to this moment. A moment where he no longer saw himself as a conqueror, but as a protector, a guide. His heart, once heavy with pride, was now light with compassion. He stepped forward, feeling the pull of the familiar path that wound through the mountain. His old home. The home where he had once been a king, ruling over the monkeys with power and might. But now, as he walked, there was no sense of superiority in him. The power he had once craved, the control he had fought so hard to keep, was gone. In its place was something far more precious, humility. As he walked through the mountain, the monkeys who had once followed him with awe and fear now stared at him with wide eyes. Their expressions were filled with disbelief. They could not recognize the Monkey King they had known, the one who had stood so tall, so proud. The king who had shown no mercy, who had demanded respect through strength alone. But there was something in the air, something that had shifted in the way they looked at him. It wasn't fear anymore. It was curiosity. And admiration. They could sense the change in him, the calmness that had settled in his heart, the new light that seemed to radiate from his being. Sun Wukong paused at the familiar tree, the one that had been his throne, his place of power. He reached out and gently touched the bark, feeling its rough texture beneath his fingers. The mountain had stood through so much, just as he had. It had witnessed his rise, his fall, and now, his return. The wind shifted, carrying with it the laughter of the monkeys. It was a sound Sun Wukong had once dismissed, a sound that had seemed beneath him, something trivial and fleeting. But now, as he listened to it, it filled his heart with warmth. He had once tried to control everything, to make the world bend to his will, but now he understood the beauty in letting things be. And letting the world unfold as it was meant to. He smiled softly, a smile that was no longer filled with arrogance, but with peace. He had fought for so long, driven by the need to prove himself, to show the world his power. But now, in the quiet of the mountain, he realized that true power was not in the battles he had won, but in the battles he had fought within himself. The greatest victory he could ever claim was the victory over his own pride. As the monkeys gathered around him, their eyes wide with wonder, Sun Wukong began to speak. His voice was steady, no longer booming with authority, but soft, like a gentle breeze. "I have returned," he said, his words simple but filled with meaning. "But not as the king I once was. I have returned as something different. Something better. I have learned that strength does not lie in force. It lies in understanding. It lies in compassion." The monkeys listened, their eyes wide, their hearts open. They had never heard their king speak this way before. The words felt like a balm, soothing the wounds of the past. They had followed him through battles, through storms, but they had never followed him like this, through the depths of his own transformation. Sun Wukong looked out at them, at his people, and for the first time, he felt the weight of their trust. It was not given to him because of his strength, but because of what he had become. His transformation had not been easy, but it had made him something far greater than he had ever imagined. He had shed the skin of arrogance and pride and had emerged as something pure, something worthy of the respect he had once demanded. The mountain around him seemed to breathe with life. The flowers bloomed with a new vibrancy, as though they, too, were reacting to his change. The air felt lighter, filled with a sense of renewal, as if the very earth had been transformed along with him. Sun Wukong had returned to this place, but he was no longer the same. And neither was the mountain. As the monkeys cheered, lifting their voices in joy, Sun Wukong felt the stirrings of something deep within him. It was a feeling of peace, of fulfillment. For the first time, he felt that he had found his true purpose, not in the battle, not in the conquest, but in the simple act of returning home. Home, not just in the physical sense, but in the deepest, most spiritual sense. He had found his place, not as a king, but as a guide. Not as a ruler, but as a protector. His heart swelled with emotion, and for a moment, he closed his eyes, feeling the weight of everything he had been through, everything he had lost, and everything he had gained. His journey had been long, and it had taken him to the farthest reaches of the world and to the deepest parts of his soul. But now, standing here on the mountain he had once ruled, he understood the true meaning of power. It was not in controlling others, but in controlling oneself. In finding peace, in embracing love, and in sharing that love with others. As the laughter of the monkeys surrounded him, Sun Wukong took a deep breath. He had returned. Not as the king who had once defied the heavens, but as the hero who had found the light within himself. A light that would guide not just the monkeys, but anyone who was lost, anyone who was searching for redemption. The wind shifted once more, carrying with it the promise of new beginnings. The mountain of flowers and fruit, once a place of pride and defiance, was now a place of peace. And Sun Wukong, the Monkey King, was no longer the ruler of the mountain, but its protector. The hero who had returned not to claim power, but to give it away. The room was quiet, lit only by the soft glow of an oil lamp. Tang Sanzang sat cross-legged, his hands resting lightly on his knees. The silence wasn't empty, it pulsed with a sense of calm, as though the world itself held its breath to listen. Before him sat a small gathering of monks and villagers, their eyes fixed on him with a mix of awe and reverence. There was no grandeur to the scene, no signs of the incredible journey that had brought him here, yet the air carried the weight of something extraordinary. He began to speak, his voice gentle yet steady, carrying the strength of truth. His words were simple, but their impact rippled through the hearts of everyone present. The greatest strength is found in compassion, he said. Not in swords, not in kingdoms, but in the willingness to understand and to heal. These weren't just words to Tang Sanzang. They were truths carved into his very soul by the trials he had faced. The countless dangers, the moments of doubt, the sacrifices, it all had meaning. And now, his mission was no longer about reaching the scriptures. It was about planting seeds, nurturing them with every word he spoke, every lesson he shared. There was a quiet power in the way he spoke. He didn't preach from a place of superiority, he shared from the depths of his experience. He had walked through fire, endured torment, and faced fear. Yet here he was, a beacon of peace. A young boy in the crowd raised his hand hesitantly, his voice trembling as he asked, "Master, why did you go so far? Why risk everything for words in a book?" Tang Sanzang turned to the boy, his eyes softening. "Because those words carry hope," he replied. "Hope for a world where we lift each other instead of tearing each other down. Hope that kindness can be stronger than hatred. It wasn't the journey that mattered, it was what the journey taught me. And what I can now share with you." The boy's eyes shone with wonder, and something shifted in the crowd. Tang Sanzang wasn't just a monk anymore. He was a bridge between the divine and the human, a living testament that the teachings he carried weren't confined to scriptures. They were alive, breathing in the way he lived and the love he shared. The older monks who had doubted him at the beginning of his pilgrimage now listened with bowed heads, humbled by his wisdom. They had seen men who claimed knowledge but lacked understanding, leaders who sought power but not peace. Tang Sanzang was different. His power came from his vulnerability, his courage to endure suffering without losing his gentleness. Even Sun Wukong, who often stood at a distance during these gatherings, found himself drawn in. The Monkey King, who had once mocked human frailty, now sat quietly in the shadows, his sharp eyes softening as he listened. Tang Sanzang had changed him, too, not by force, but by showing him another way. The villagers whispered among themselves about how this simple monk had done what armies and kings could not. He had tamed the untamable, walked through the lands of demons and spirits, and returned with something more valuable than gold or power. They spoke of his unwavering faith, his ability to see good even in the darkest hearts. But Tang Sanzang wasn't interested in their admiration. He saw his role as a guide, nothing more. He wasn't the hero of the story, he was the vessel through which light could shine. And that light wasn't his alone, it belonged to everyone willing to seek it. One night, as the stars glittered above, a woman approached him. She was trembling, her eyes filled with tears. "Master," she whispered, "my son is lost to anger. He fights, he drinks, he steals. I don't know how to save him." Tang Sanzang looked at her with infinite kindness. He didn't offer false promises or easy answers. Instead, he said, "Love him without condition, but don't shield him from the truth. Show him the strength in your forgiveness, and let him see that there's a better way." Her tears flowed freely as she nodded, clutching her hands to her chest. In that moment, it wasn't just her son who found hope, it was her, too. His teaching spread, not through grand proclamations, but through moments like these. Quiet moments that echoed far beyond the mountains and valleys. People began to live differently, inspired by his words. They forgave old grudges, cared for the vulnerable, and sought understanding instead of conflict. Even years later, long after Tang Sanzang's physical presence had faded, his influence remained. His name was whispered with reverence, not as a man who had achieved enlightenment for himself, but as one who had lit a path for others to follow. In the stillness of the night, Tang Sanzang often reflected on his journey. He thought of the companions who had walked beside him, each transformed in their own way. He thought of Sun Wukong, whose fierce loyalty had become a shield for the weak. He thought of Zhu Beiji, who had learned humility, and Xiao Wujing, who had found redemption. But most of all, he thought of the people. The countless faces he had seen along the way. Faces etched with pain, hope, fear, and love. They were why he had endured. Why he had kept going even when the road seemed impossible. And in his heart, he knew his task was far from over. The journey to bring light to the world was endless, but it was worth every step. The teachings he shared weren't his alone, they belonged to anyone who was willing to listen, to learn, to change. The quiet glow of the lamp flickered as Tang Sanzang sat in meditation, his face serene. He wasn't seeking anything for himself anymore. His life was no longer his own, it was a gift to the world. And in that selflessness, he had found something far greater than enlightenment. In the quiet of a lantern-lit room, a grandmother's voice wove through the stillness like a melody. Her grandson sat at her feet, his eyes wide with wonder, clutching a small wooden figurine of a monkey. She leaned closer, her voice soft yet alive with emotion. "This," she said, gesturing to the figurine, "is Sun Wukong, the Monkey King. He could leap across mountains, fight armies with a single strike, and stand unbroken against the gods themselves. But do you know what made him truly powerful?" The boy shook his head, holding his breath. "It was his heart," she whispered. "A heart that learned to care, to fight for more than just himself." Sun Wukong was more than a figure in a tale. He had grown larger than life, etched into the very spirit of the people. In bustling marketplaces, his name echoed in laughter as children mimicked his mischievous antics, twirling sticks like the legendary Rui Jinggu Bang. In theaters, actors donned vibrant costumes, their faces painted with fierce expressions, leaping across the stage as though they, too, carried the Monkey King's boundless energy. The stories spoke of his strength, his cunning, his defiance against injustice. But what the people clung to most was his transformation. Sun Wukong wasn't born a hero, he became one, shaped by struggle, by mistakes, and by the guidance of those who believed in him. This journey of redemption and growth resonated deeply. To the farmer tilling the fields, he was a symbol of resilience, proof that even when the skies darkened and the earth cracked, one could rise again. To the scholar hunched over ancient texts, he was a spark of inspiration, reminding them to challenge the limits of their understanding. To the child in the crowd, watching the puppet shows under the stars, he was a friend, a protector, someone who fought for the weak and the forgotten. Sun Wukong's legend transcended the pages of scripture. He was painted onto temple walls, his figure standing tall amidst clouds and lightning, his eyes burning with determination. Festivals erupted in his honor, with parades that filled the streets with vibrant colors and deafening drums. Men and women dressed as the Monkey King danced through the crowds, their movements wild and free, capturing his indomitable spirit. Even in times of despair, his story carried light. During wars and famines, when hope seemed a distant dream, elders whispered his name as though invoking a talisman. If Sun Wukong could face the heavens and endure, so can we, they said. And somehow, those words made people stand a little taller, their burdens feeling just a bit lighter. His irreverence toward authority spoke to those who felt trapped by rules that stifled their spirits. He wasn't bound by the chains of expectation. He shattered them, rewriting his destiny with every act of defiance. Yet, his story reminded everyone that rebellion without purpose was hollow. It wasn't enough to fight, one had to fight for what truly mattered. And then there was his loyalty, unwavering and fierce. Sun Wukong, who once answered to no one, became a protector, a brother, a friend. He guarded Tang Sanzang not because he had to, but because he chose to. That choice, born from love and responsibility, turned him from a rogue into a legend. Across the centuries, his tale bent and shifted, reshaped by each storyteller's hand. In one version, he was a trickster, outwitting demons with laughter in his voice. In another, he was a warrior, his staff splitting mountains and seas. Yet, no matter how the details changed, his essence remained the same, a beacon of strength, humor, and redemption. His influence rippled far beyond the borders of his homeland. Travelers carried his story to distant lands, where he mingled with other myths and heroes. In some places, he became a protector of children, in others, a guardian spirit who fought against darkness. His laughter, his ferocity, his heart, they became universal, speaking to something timeless within every soul. Sun Wukong was flawed, and that was what made him loved. He stumbled, he raged, he failed. But he also learned, adapted, and grew. In him, people saw themselves, their struggles, their hopes, their potential to change. He reminded them that greatness wasn't about being perfect, it was about rising after every fall. The grandmother's voice grew softer as she spoke of his final transformation, the moment when Sun Wukong stood as an equal among the Buddhas. Her grandson, clutching the figurine tightly, whispered, "Does he still protect us?" She smiled, her eyes glistening. "Always," she said. "Every time you stand up for what's right, every time you choose kindness over anger, every time you believe in yourself even when the world says you can't, that's when he's with you." And as the night stretched on, the boy sat quietly, staring at the small wooden figure in his hands. For the first time, he didn't see just a monkey with a staff. He saw a friend, a guide, a piece of himself. The inkstone sat on the scholar's desk, a quiet witness to the birth of something extraordinary. By the flickering light of an oil lamp, a brush moved with purpose across rice paper. The strokes were firm yet graceful, painting the story of a being who defied gods and demons alike. Sun Wukong was not just a character, he was alive, breathing in the hearts of those who wrote about him. With every stroke, the Monkey King leapt further into eternity, his tale growing with each retelling. As the dynasties rose and fell, so too did the shape of his legend. In the Tang era, whispers of Sun Wukong swirled through the tea houses, his mischievous feats sparking laughter among farmers and nobles alike. He was a rebel then, a symbol of strength against the weight of the heavens. To the common folk, he was a source of hope, a figure who challenged authority and carved his own path, undeterred by the wrath of kings or gods. In the Song dynasty, the Monkey King's tale transformed, weaving through the hearts of poets and playwrights. The raw energy of his defiance softened, touched by themes of loyalty and redemption. The people began to see not just a warrior but a companion, someone who stumbled, who learned, who became better with every battle. His story began to carry lessons, reflecting the struggles and aspirations of a changing world. Then came the Ming Dynasty, a golden age of art and literature. It was during this time that his story found its truest voice and journey to the West. Wu Cheng'an, with his brilliant imagination, etched Sun Wukong into immortality. The Monkey King was now more than a tale passed through whispers. He was a masterpiece written in ink and bound in silk. He wasn't just a trickster or a warrior anymore. He was a pilgrim, walking alongside Tang Sanzang, a flawed yet noble soul seeking enlightenment. But even as the book became a treasure, cherished in the hands of scholars and emperors, Sun Wukong's story remained alive in the streets. Puppet shows brought his antics to life, the clang of cymbals and the laughter of children echoing in bustling marketplaces. Storytellers, their voices thick with emotion, recounted his battles and triumphs, each word casting a spell over their eager audiences. For the people, he wasn't just a character in a book, he was a friend, a guardian, a hero. The Qing dynasty saw new layers added to his legend. The Monkey King became a mirror, reflecting the fears and hopes of a nation under foreign rule. His defiance took on a sharper edge, his battles against celestial powers becoming metaphors for resistance and resilience. Artists painted him with fiery eyes and an unyielding stance, a symbol of unbroken spirit in turbulent times. Even as the centuries marched on, Sun Wukong refused to fade. With the dawn of modern China, his story found new homes. In theaters, actors adorned in elaborate costumes performed his battles with demons, their movements as fluid and powerful as the tides. In literature, his essence was reimagined, adapted to the pulse of a rapidly changing world. And when the silver screen arrived, he leapt once more, this time, larger than life, his deeds lighting up the faces of audiences in darkened halls. The Monkey King's tale wasn't static, it danced across time, reshaping itself to speak to each generation. He became a bridge between the past and the present, his story carrying the weight of history while remaining as fresh and vibrant as ever. Whether he was fighting celestial armies or standing beside Tang Sanzang in their quest for sacred scriptures, his spirit remained unbroken, a spirit that belonged to the people. In the hands of poets, playwrights, painters, and filmmakers, Sun Wukong continued to evolve. Yet, no matter how much his story changed, one thing remained constant: his humanity. Beneath the immortal power, the strength, and the cunning, he was someone who fell, who hurt, who grew. That was what made him timeless. That was why, in every era, people found themselves in his story. And even now, as lights flicker on screens and books sit on shelves waiting to be opened, the Monkey King lives on. His staff still strikes fear into the hearts of villains, his laughter still rings through the air, wild and free. He is not just a story from the past, he is a part of the present, a part of everyone who dares to dream, to fight, to rise. Somewhere, a child clutches a toy monkey, their imagination filling with thoughts of courage and adventure. Somewhere else, an artist dips their brush, painting Sun Wukong's fiery gaze onto canvas. The tale that began centuries ago continues, leaping forward into what comes next. And the Monkey King, as he always has, leads the way. The sound of drums echoed through a distant theater, a heartbeat of another time, another place. Yet, in the vibrant rhythm and rising energy, one figure stood tall, unforgettable. The Monkey King. He wasn't confined to China, nor bound by the ink of a book. His spirit leapt across oceans, reshaping itself to fit the dreams and tales of the world. In the bustling streets of Southeast Asia, his image was carved into wooden masks, his presence celebrated in traditional dances. Each movement carried his mischievous energy, his rebellious spark. People who had never heard his name still felt his essence in the rhythm of a story that defied gravity, a tale that laughed in the face of limitations. Across the oceans, his story transformed. Japan embraced him, their storytellers weaving him into their myths, their art. He became a kami, a godlike figure of boundless energy and wit. In their animations, he swung his staff, not as an outsider, but as a kindred spirit to their own heroes. His fiery eyes became a symbol of strength in a world that craved courage. In India, a land of ancient epics, Sun Wukong found echoes of himself in Hanuman, the monkey deity of their lore. Two stories intertwined across borders, their similarities striking, a shared love for mischief, loyalty, and strength. Though separated by time and space, they mirrored each other, like two stars in the same endless sky. the Western world wasn't immune to his charm. Writers found him irresistible, a figure who could bend rules, fight giants, and still wrestle with his own flaws. He leapt into graphic novels, his silhouette dominating pages with bold strokes and vibrant colors. His staff, now a weapon of cinematic wonder, became the center of battles that thrilled audiences. Movies reimagined him as a hero for a new age, his rebellious spirit untouched by the sands of time. In Africa, his story took on a life of its own. Storytellers in village gatherings drew inspiration from his boundless courage. He wasn't just a monkey to them, he became an ancestor, a spirit of resilience, a trickster who outwitted danger in a world that often felt unfair. His laughter, imagined and retold, became a shared moment of hope in dark times. In the Americas, his name was woven into tales of resistance and individuality. Artists painted him on murals, his face defiant, his eyes burning with a fire that said, "I will not bow." Children who had never set foot in Asia wore t-shirts with his image, not knowing his story but feeling his energy, his unbreakable will. In Europe, he found his way into theater and opera, his story interpreted through the lens of Western drama. Audiences sat spellbound, watching him leap across the stage, his golden crown glinting in the spotlight. The actors brought him to life, their voices carrying his defiance, their movements channeling his uncontainable spirit. The Monkey King didn't just adapt, he thrived. He wasn't one thing to one people, he was many things to many hearts. To some, he was a trickster who laughed at authority. To others, he was a hero who stood against impossible odds. And to many, he was simply hope, a reminder that no matter how heavy the chains, there's always a way to break free. Somewhere in a small town, a child turns the pages of a book, their fingers tracing the lines of a new hero. In a bustling city, a teenager watches an animation, their heart racing as a Monkey King takes on the heavens. And in another corner of the world, an elder recounts the tale, their voice trembling with the weight of a story that has traveled so far yet lost nothing of its power. The Monkey King is not bound by language, culture, or borders. He's a spirit that refuses to be tamed, a flame that burns brighter with each retelling. And just when you think you've seen the last of him, he surprises you again, leaping forward into the unknown. The tale isn't over. Not yet. The night was quiet, the kind of stillness that pressed on the skin and whispered to the soul. A lone figure stood under the stars, his shadow stretching long across the earth. He had once been proud, untouchable, a force that no heaven or hell could contain. Now, he gazed at the vastness above, not with arrogance, but with something new, humility. His staff, once wielded with defiance, rested lightly in his hand, as if it had become part of him rather than an extension of his power. Sun Wukong's transformation was not a single moment. It was a battle waged within, a storm of anger, regret, and the yearning for something more. He had been unyielding, reckless, and fierce. Yet, in his endless clashes with gods, demons, and himself, he began to see the cracks in his own spirit. Those cracks didn't weaken him, they let the light in. There were nights he stood alone, far from his companions, staring at his reflection in a quiet stream. The face staring back was both familiar and foreign. He saw the eyes of a creature who had once stolen the treasures of the heavens, mocked the divine, and declared himself king. Yet, he also saw the glimmers of something softer, compassion, patience, and the beginnings of understanding. When he thought of redemption, it wasn't about making amends for his past, but about becoming something more. The old Sun Wukong would have laughed at the thought of humility. The new one carried it like a badge, not of shame, but of growth. Transformation was never easy. It came in whispers and roars, in moments of stillness and in battles that tested every fiber of his being. There were times when he stumbled, times when the weight of his flaws felt unbearable. Yet, each time he rose, the world seemed a little brighter, his steps a little lighter. He didn't transform alone. Alongside him were those who believed in him, even when he didn't believe in himself. Tang Sanzang's teachings were like seeds planted in the rocky soil of his soul. At first, they seemed pointless, buried under the rubble of his stubbornness. But slowly, they grew, their roots reaching deep, breaking apart the stones of his pride. The words of his master were like water to those seeds, nurturing them until they flourished into something beautiful. Self-discovery wasn't about finding something new, it was about uncovering what had always been there. Sun Wukong had been strong, clever, and fearless since the day he was born from stone. But what he learned on his journey was that true strength came from kindness, true cleverness from wisdom, and true fearlessness from love. He learned to see himself not as the center of the universe, but as part of something greater. Each step he took alongside his companions, each battle fought, and each lesson learned chipped away at the walls he had built around his heart. There was a moment, quiet yet monumental, when he knelt in a temple, not to demand, but to give thanks. The heavens that once seemed like enemies now felt like a home he had been too blind to see. He realized that his greatest enemy had never been the gods or the demons. It had been his own fear of being vulnerable, of being seen, of being small. In overcoming that fear, he found something greater than the immortality he had fought so hard to achieve. He found peace, not the kind that comes from victory, but the kind that comes from acceptance. He accepted his past, his mistakes, and his flaws. More importantly, he accepted the beauty within himself, a beauty that had been hidden beneath layers of defiance and pride. Every step of his journey had been a lesson, every challenge a mirror reflecting a piece of his soul. As he looked back, he didn't see a straight path, but a winding road filled with twists, turns, and moments that defined him. It wasn't a story of perfection, but of perseverance, of falling and rising again. The stars above seemed to shine brighter as he stood there, his staff planted firmly in the ground. He no longer needed to prove his worth. He had found it, not in the approval of others, but within himself. The heavens hadn't changed, the world hadn't changed, but he had. And that was enough. The wind carried a quiet hum through the ancient mountains, weaving through valleys where echoes of 1,000 battles and laughter from centuries past still lingered. Somewhere in the folds of time, a faint, mischievous chuckle seemed to ripple through the air, as if the Monkey King himself was watching, ever present, ever alive. His shadow, though unseen, felt vivid, etched not on walls or scrolls, but in the hearts of those who had dared to dream, fight, and transform. Sun Wukong wasn't a mere figure of legend. He was a spark, a restless, rebellious spirit that refused to be bound by rules or fate. His journey through chaos and redemption spoke to something primal, something universal. Generations heard his name and felt the pulse of his courage, the wildness of his defiance, and the warmth of his eventual grace. There were stories of him in the bustling streets of cities, where merchants sold charms carved in his image, their surfaces polished smooth by countless hands seeking his protection. In quiet temples, monks chanted his name, their voices steady and reverent, calling on the strength he embodied. And then there were the children, their eyes wide with wonder as they sat cross-legged, hanging on every word of the storyteller who spun tales of the monkey who outwitted gods and demons alike. Yet, Sun Wukong was more than the tales told about him. He was the laughter in the face of fear, the resilience that rose against impossible odds, and the wisdom gained through pain and perseverance. For the farmer who toiled under the scorching sun, he was a symbol of grit. For the scholar wrestling with the complexities of the world, he was a reminder that even chaos could be shaped into purpose. For the child standing up to a bully for the first time, he was courage given form. Across the lands and ages, his spirit took root. He wasn't bound to a single language or culture. Wherever there was a story of a trickster who challenged authority or a hero who transformed through hardship, there was an echo of Sun Wukong. His tale traveled far beyond the boundaries of his origin, finding homes in distant lands, merging with other myths, and reshaping itself to fit the dreams of those who encountered him. In bustling markets of Southeast Asia, storytellers wove his escapades into local folklore, blending him with the spirits and heroes of their own traditions. Across oceans, in lands where his name was unfamiliar, his essence lived on in the mischief of other characters, their sharp wits and daring feats bearing the unmistakable mark of the Monkey King. The most remarkable thing about him wasn't just the stories themselves, but the way they evolved. They grew alongside the people who carried them, adapting to new times and new struggles. Sun Wukong wasn't a relic of the past. He was a living, breathing force that refused to fade. He lived in the bold brushstrokes of an artist capturing his defiant stance, in the whispered words of a prayer asking for his strength, and in the quiet determination of anyone standing tall against overwhelming odds. The Monkey King's legacy wasn't static, it was alive, shifting, and uncontainable. It was the quiet smile of a grandfather sharing his favorite story with his grandchildren. It was the roar of an audience cheering for a hero inspired by Wukong's indomitable spirit on a theater stage. It was the glint in the eye of a child, imagining themselves wielding his golden staff. Even as the world changed, temples crumbled, new gods were worshipped, and traditions evolved, his spirit remained, untamed and undying. It didn't matter whether the stories were told by firelight or projected on cinema screens, the essence of Sun Wukong remained unchanged. He was chaos and courage, rebellion and redemption, mischief and mastery, all at once. Some said he could never truly be defeated because he wasn't just a character in a tale. He was an idea, and ideas couldn't be bound. They lived in the hearts of people, carried like flames, spreading wherever they were needed most. Perhaps that's why, on quiet nights when the stars blazed bright, some swore they could hear the faint tap-tap-tap of a golden staff against stone, the sound of a hero who never truly left.